Okay, we'll kick things off. Welcome to the fourth and final hearing of the committee's inquiry into the impact of the Rozelle Interchange. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians on the lands on which we are meeting today. I pay my respects to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. My name is Kate Fairmond and I am chair of the committee. I ask everyone in the room to please turn their mobile phones to silent. Parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses in relation to the evidence they give today. However, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of the hearing. I urge witnesses to be careful about making comments to the media or to others after completing their evidence. In addition, the Legislative Council has adopted rules to provide procedural fairness for inquiry participants. I encourage committee members and witnesses to be mindful of these procedures. Welcome, Mr. Regan, and thank you for making the time to give evidence. Could you please start by, obviously we'll swear you in, by please stating your name and position, title, and swearing either an oath or an affirmation.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Peter Regan. I'm the Chief Executive of Sydney Metro. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Regan. Now, would you like to start by making an opening statement?
With your permission, Chair, yes.
Thank you, please.
So good morning, Chair and honourable members. I'm the Chief Executive of Sydney Metro. However, I understand you've requested my appearance here today, not in that capacity, but rather in relation to previous roles I've held within New South Wales Government in connection with the WestConnex program. A number of government organisations have had a role in the planning, delivery and financing of WestConnex, and there were changes in the roles and remits of those organisations through the development and the delivery of the program. However, at all times, governance structures were in place, planning and modelling was extensive and robust, and each project that formed WestConnex was required to comply with Infrastructure New South Wales' assurance framework in place at the time. The ultimate decision makers for WestConnex were, appropriately and at all times, the Cabinet and the ministers of the government of the day. WestConnex, as you would be aware, comprised a series of stages which were intended to be delivered sequentially, with the original intent being that the financing raised against each stage would fund delivery of the next. The program was then accelerated when the federal government of the day provided a concessional loan for stage 2 of WestConnex, which enabled stages 1 and 2, which is the M4 East and the new M5 as they were known, to proceed simultaneously. As development work on WestConnex continued, future links were also envisaged to the north and the south to create a comprehensive and integrated network strategy. Today, these are the Western Harbour Tunnel and M6 Stage 1 projects. I can briefly outline for the public record the positions I held with each of New South Wales Treasury, the WestConnex Delivery Authority, Sydney Motorway Corporation and Transport for New South Wales. From about November 2012 to March 2014, I was the Head of Infrastructure Finance at New South Wales Treasury. This role included the development of the financing strategy for WestConnex. From April to August in 2014, I was seconded from Treasury to the WestConnex Delivery Authority, WDA, as its Chief Financial Officer. WDA was the agency initially established to manage the planning and delivery of WestConnex. In September 2014, the government established the Sydney Motorway Corporation, SMC, to finance the construction, delivery and operations of WestConnex. I was appointed Chief Executive Officer of Sydney Motorway Corporation at its establishment and remained in that role until around the middle of 2015. In mid-2015, the government client functions of WestConnex Delivery Authority were transferred to Roads and Maritime Services, and Sydney Motorway Corporation assumed the project procurement functions of the WestConnex Delivery Authority. The WDA CEO became the Chief Executive Officer of Sydney Motorway Corporation, while I took on the role of Chief Financial Officer and Deputy CEO of the Sydney Motorway Corporation, and held that position until I joined Transport for New South Wales as its Deputy Secretary of Finance and Investment and Chief Financial Officer in December of that year, that is December 2015. In that role, I was involved in the management and governance of the sale process for the government's sale of SMC. In terms of planning for the Rozelle Interchange, while specific details were subject to Cabinet deliberations, I would refer the committee to the process outlined specifically in the publicly available WestConnex updated strategic business case of 2015, particularly at or about pages 138 and 139. This outlines the nature of the advice put to the government about the alignment of WestConnex Stage 3 and the evaluation of 16 options that informed the advice. The updated strategic business case also outlines the then government's 10 tolling principles, with which the tolling assumptions of WestConnex were required to comply with. These included that untolled alternative arterial roads remain available for customers. This is reflected in the inclusion of the toll-free Iron Cove link as part of Stage 3. I look forward to assisting the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Regan. So, with Sydney Motorway Corporation, you said from the what date? September 2014.
So yes, it was established in September of 2014.
Yes, and you got the CEO
Correct.
position.
And I was in that role until the middle of 2015 and moved to Transport for New South Wales in December 2015.
Was for the establishment of the SMC and for you to get that role of CEO, was there an open recruitment process for that, or were you just kind of put in the job after being head of, Chief Financial Officer for the WestConnex Delivery Authority, I think? That was your former job.
I was seconded from Treasury to the WestConnex Delivery Authority and was also on the board of the WestConnex Delivery Authority at that time. The government established the Sydney Motorway Corporation, a proprietary limited company, for the purpose of the financing, and I was appointed by the government at that time into that role.
So you were appointed, there was no open recruitment process, just to be clear?
No, I was appointed by the shareholders. That was the Treasurer and the Roads Minister.
Okay, thank you. And what was your involvement? Did you have anything while you were at the WestConnex Delivery Authority, I assume, in the establishment itself of the SMC, what the SMC, I assume that you were heavily involved in
Yes.
that.
Yes, that's correct.
What about your involvement in the Rozelle interchange design broadly?
So I think the time sequence is very important. My primary involvement from Treasury and WDA and then at Sydney Motorway Corporation was in the overall financing structure and strategy for the WestConnex program, and in particular the procurement and financing of stages 1 and 2. The Rozelle interchange, there was some early work done, which was included in the updated strategic business case for the WestConnex project, which Sydney Motorway Corporation, while I was there, assisted in the preparation of that for WestConnex Delivery Authority and Roads and Maritime. But that was not the final set of decisions, obviously, and I think you've already had evidence around the timeframes of those decisions. So the original alignment of WestConnex from its initial conception was further south and did not go to Roselle, but the decisions were taken by government on a progressive basis, commencing in 2015 with that strategic business case, to add a northern connection to WestConnex to facilitate connection ultimately to the Western Harbour Tunnel as part of the network strategy of a western bypass of the CBD. At that point, the actual design of the interchanges and the on and off ramps was not completed. That was done at a later point.
So with the updated WestConnex business case in 2015, which had the design enhancements as you've just suggested, who provided that direction? Firstly, did that come from within Sydney Motorway Corporation to suggest Western Harbour Tunnel and the connections as you've given evidence today? Was that from Sydney Motorway Corporation, or did that direction come from the Minister or somewhere else?
Well, the work at all times, there were more than one agency involved. There is a client-side agency and ultimately the delivery and agency and the financing responsibilities were initially sitting in different agencies. So the WestConnex Delivery Authority was created by the government at the time to take on the responsibility for the development of the project and its design and procurement. And the Sydney Motorway Corporation originally was effectively the financier of that and was set up to be the longer-term owner of the WestConnex assets, but to facilitate the raising of finance and the sale, subsequent sale of those stages to the private sector. So the design work in the early stages was done in the WestConnex Delivery Authority. When the changes were made in 2015 to the structure of the agencies, the client-side functions were transferred from WDA back to Roads and Maritime, and the procurement function went over into SMC. So RMS at that point became the client agency, and the work that was undertaken to support government in making those decisions, and all those decisions ultimately on scope and on the financing were cabinet decisions and taken to cabinet by the relevant ministers at the time, with the support of the relevant agency. So in those cases, RMS, and then via the Roads Minister to cabinet.
Just before I go on, I just wanted to, sorry, I should have done this when you finished your opening statement. Is it possible to hand that up? No, it's you reading it on
I'm happy to table. I don't
Thank
have
you.
it with me, but I'll hand
Okay,
up. I think I read
after
it.
your-
I think I read it word for word.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to table that.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Regan, you have said that it was a decision of Cabinet, so those design changes, but my question was not ultimately who decided upon it, but where did the idea come from? What the genesis of the idea? Did it come from within those changes in, let's do the changes in 2015 to begin with, in terms of the updated strategic business case in 2015, the decision to duplicate the City West Link and bring that road to Roselle, that idea, where was the genesis of that idea?
Chair, from memory, there was a lot of work being done at the time around the motorway road network and the major road network. That original thinking was part of the work that Infrastructure New South Wales was undertaking as in preparation for its initial state infrastructure strategies, and that, from memory, was looking at the relative priorities of potentially extending the M4 or the M5, and the original concept of WestConnex of joining those together came from that process, from Infrastructure New South Wales. The WestConnex Delivery Authority, working with RMS, and then subsequently also with Sydney Motorway Corp, were all working on the overall strategy that was set out in that business case. The business case, of course, as is normal, is then taken to government for decision by the relevant agency. But there was a lot of work being done throughout those organisations to develop not only the potential options for government consideration on WestConnex, but it was recognised from work that was done during that time that there was also an opportunity to extend north and south, as I've flagged in my statement, to create a broader network impact that would further enhance the objectives of the project, especially by creating a western bypass of the CBD.
What involvement did you have in the design or the idea, the genesis of Rozelle Interchange? What was your involvement?
Well, as I said, my focus was primarily on the financing and the procurement, particularly in the first two stages. There was some work done while I was still at Sydney Motorway Corp in the lead up to the business case that clearly looked at other options, and those northern and southern connections in particular, which did form part of a longer-term strategic process and a longer-term strategic plan for potential inclusion in the future, of those extensions and the enhancement to the Sydney Gateway project, also to connect to the airport. But to be clear, Chair, I'm not a traffic engineer, nor am I an engineer at all. And so the actual design of the interchange is not something that I was a part of.
But you were responsible for, at Sydney Motorway Corporation, you were responsible for really making sure that what was ultimately sold was going to make the most money for the government, wasn't it?
No, I think that's, if I could try and explain, at that point, up until 2015, when I left Sydney Motorway Corporation, the intent of the financing arrangements that were being put in place were to transfer the ownership of each of the stages separately, and I was only involved in that financing up to stage 2, to the private sector at a point in the future. Decisions around the aggregated sale of stages 1, 2 and 3 were made subsequently, and were made ultimately the sale process 2017, 2018. The decisions around that were made separately to and after the design changes had been implemented.
Did Sydney Motorway Corporation put to the government to build Rozelle Interchange?
No, that came from RMS.
So what role did Sydney Motorway Corporation have in the design process?
So it was working with RMS. So the process, as I was saying, there is a client agency which has the ultimately the reporting directly through an agency accountability to the relevant minister and then through to cabinet, and they take the submissions to the minister that then go to cabinet. Sydney Motorway Corporation was supporting those client agencies in doing that work. In its initial configuration, Sydney Motorway Corp only had 5 or 6 employees. It was not a large organisation. It was set up as a financing vehicle to receive the assets, and the drive was with WDA and then RMS. Now, my understanding is after I left SMC that the SMC continued to work very closely with RMS to further the design. Each of the stages of WestConnex at the time before construction contracts were let were structured into quite detailed concession agreements, as they're called, which are the basis of PPP or public-private partnership structures. And as each of those stages were progressively contracted, those concession agreements were entered into between RMS and the Sydney Motorway Corporation. They set out not only the long-run obligations of the owner, but they also include quite detailed specification of design.
So government witnesses to our last hearing, when we put this question to them, Camilla Drover said that in 2015 there was an updated strategic business case for WestConnex. At that time there was a decision to duplicate the City West Link and bring that road to Roselle. When I asked her who ordered that, where did that come from, she said her understanding is it was done by Sydney Motorway Corporation. Was Camilla Drover telling lies to this committee, or is your evidence evidence that Sydney Motorway Corporation didn't have anything to do with it?
No, I didn't say that, actually, to be clear, Chair. I said that Sydney Motorway Corporation was involved working with RMS. So
who ordered it? Because she said it was SMC.
It's SMC. It's not a matter of ordering. The decisions and the process that is followed is that the responsible agencies and their chief executives or secretaries are accountable to the relevant minister. In the case of RMS, in the case of the WestConnex Delivery Authority, who commenced the work before its functions were merged with SMC, and that is important, that the functions did change in the middle of 2015. The responsible agencies were reporting to the Roads Minister. Sydney Motorway Corporation had a different structure, but was not making decisions on behalf of the government. It was making decisions off the back of the mandate that it had and the concession agreements that were entered into with RMS, and it was accountable to its shareholders, who were, again, the Roads Minister, but also the Treasurer.
I'll just move to questions from government members now. Mr Namber.
Thank you, Chair. Just to build on Ms Fairman's questions. So, during your time at Treasury, as you've stated, part of your responsibility was to oversee financing for the WestConnex project.
For the original financing strategy, Yes.
Traffic forecasts are an important part of that work.
Traffic forecasts form part of the financing, but traffic forecasts are not undertaken by Treasury. Clearly the financing arrangements are a product of how capital is raised and what sources of capital are accessed, and then how it is repaid. And the repayment, I guess you could simply describe as the revenues less the costs, and clearly the revenues of a toll road company are the traffic times the toll, less the costs, and then less the cost of servicing the financing. So it is an important factor as to what the traffic levels will be in the financing strategy. But the financing strategy that was being adopted initially, if I could take a moment to explain the context, at that time, 2012, 2013, the international and the global financial markets were still quite depressed following the global financial crisis. But relevant to toll roads, particularly in Australia, which the most sort of probably over the last 20 years, all of the toll roads in Australia had been done through public-private partnership structures. There was no appetite in the private sector market to take what is known as toll risk at that time. And that's primarily driven by hangover from the GFC, but also the previous 4 toll roads, 2 in Sydney, 2 in Brisbane, had all gone into receivership. So the previously available financing strategies were not accessible. But like most financing aspects, they go in cycles. And so the decision at the time and the initial work on the strategy for financing was to accept that that market wasn't there at the time, but to set it up so it could be accessed when it was there in the future.
Well, I'll come to that context in a moment, but for the purposes of your role with respect to financing, traffic forecasts were an important aspect of that work.
Very much an important
Not determinative, but important.
An important input, because
Okay.
it goes to the revenue and the costs, but we did not do the traffic forecasting ourselves. No.
Sure. It's the case then, isn't it, that traffic modelling, the number of vehicles potentially tolled, would be important for the business case for WestConnex?
Oh, absolutely, and
therefore financing the project.
And ultimately, the financing is a follow-on to the original business case. So the business case assists the government to make the investment decision in the first place. But then the detail of the traffic and the impact on the network and the like is detailed in the environmental impact statement.
Yep.
And goes through the process before planning approvals, which all happens before you get to financing.
If I can be crude about it, then the more vehicles tolled, the stronger the business case, and the more accessible the financing.
So perhaps just to be precise, if I may, clearly the more vehicles up to a point that improves the business case if those vehicles are getting a improved, if there's a benefit to those vehicles. But clearly, if they are, there's a point where a road can only has so much capacity. So, yes, the more vehicles on a road that is designated as a toll road means that there is the potential for more revenue on that road.
So, would it be fair to say that traffic forecasts and modelling can then have some influence or impact on design?
Certainly, the design of any piece of infrastructure, be it toll road or not, clearly is impacted by, and a key factor in that design is the level of forecast traffic. If you put a toll on a piece of road, it would have less traffic than if you didn't have a toll. And so there is a key relationship there that the forecast of traffic on an untolled basis is different to the forecast of traffic on a toll basis. The toll traffic is less.
So could I come to the context that you referred to a bit earlier, where unlike other motorway projects where governments take on the procurement and planning process, WestConnex was a little different in that the government took on the traffic, construction and financial risk attached to the project?
Initially, yes, and then with the intent to transfer that to the private sector through subsequent transactions when the market was available.
But Treasury would have been motivated at the time, would it not, to minimise the risk and recover its costs?
At the initial stage, the level of financing, yes, there was an intent behind the financing to recover part of the cost of the project, but it was not an objective of that financing to recover the full cost of the project. It was simply to raise the level of debt initially and then ultimately sell at a level that would allow a recovery of that cost when the market was more available. But it was not in that initial strategy designed in a way that would recover the full cost, but certainly the objective was initially to effectively recycle capital from the first stage to fund the second stage, and then the third stage thereafter to create a sort of a rolling pipeline of financing to deliver the stages. Now that changed as things progressed, and as I mentioned, the federal government also provided some additional financing which allowed that to accelerate. But they were decisions that the government was making on the way through, with advice, yes, from Treasury, with advice from Sydney Motorway Corporation to its shareholders, and working very closely with the road agencies, WDA and RMS.
But there would have been an incentive to minimise costs, minimise risk and recover costs. I wouldn't have known of a Treasury official that didn't have that motivation.
Of course, the point of the financing, first of all, the initial challenge was actually getting people to buy into it at all because of what I had described. And to protect the taxpayers from not having underwritten private financing, one of the interesting features of the way it was set up is that the debt that was raised by the Sydney Motorway Corporation was unguaranteed by the state. So the lenders and the financiers were having to take their own view on the level of revenue that would come and when it would come.
Just to follow up a few of those questions from the Chair, just between 2014 and 15, and during the period of your involvement with WestConnex, there were changes to the strategic objectives of Stage 3 and then the design of Stage 3 of the project, which ostensibly had the effect of moving more traffic towards Anzac Bridge and the conceptualisation of the Rozelle Interchange, against advice from Transport for New South Wales, Infrastructure New South Wales, the WestConnex Expert Reference Group, Evans and Peck, who were consultants at the time, as I understand it. That's correct, isn't it?
I don't recall all of that, no. So to be clear, the decision...
You had no visibility
no.
on any of that?
I'm happy to answer the question. The strategic business case that the government adopted and is published in 2015 set out a whole series of options that were considered around moving the alignment and creating the potential for a future northern extension. It did not make final decisions around where the ramps and the interchanges were or the design of those interchanges. The decision, I think, that you're referring to around the changes to the actual design of the interchange itself is a decision that was made in 2017.
So this committee's previously received or heard evidence that numerous expert reference group reviews into the design recommended against the Rozelle Interchange and funneling traffic towards the Anzac Bridge. And those reviews included, on several occasions, the involvement of the RMS. Your evidence this morning is that fundamentally the decision or the catalyst to rework the design came from the RMS. Is that correct?
My evidence is that the decisions around the changes were as appropriately made ultimately by government, by the relevant minister on advice from the agencies. The function of WDA in the original design was transferred in part to RMS and in part to the Sydney Motorway Corporation while it was still in government's ownership. And therefore there were advice from Sydney Motorway Corp to its shareholders, the Treasurer and the Roads Minister, and there was advice from the relevant roads agency, RMS.
In any of your roles, were you ever privy to any discussions or information with respect to the strategic objectives and the design of Stage 3 and the rationales for
there's
those objectives?
Extensive detail on that in the strategic business case in 2015.
Were you privy to any any discussions regarding potential changes to the design and objectives?
It's, as I said, it's in the strategic business case that was prepared with the input of Sydney Motorway Corporation.
So what was the fundamental rationale behind the reworking of the design as it was originally conceived to what it finally ended up?
It's set out in the strategic business case. There were 16 options looked at. They all have pros and cons. And ultimately, the government of the day made the decision around whichever of those options, I don't know the number, to look at moving the alignment further to the north. There was then further work undertaken around the detail of that design, which didn't get finalised until the procurement of stage 3 commenced sometime later. So there are a series of decisions and that related to the attempt to ensure maximum flexibility for future connectivity.
Why did the Auditor-General report then of 2021 state that Transport for New South Wales did not publish the rationale for the design change? The Auditor-General was very frustrated, in fact, with this and tried to get information from agencies, I think, including Transport for New South Wales and SMC, but they've stated that the design was actually, the rationale for the design change hasn't been published, and that, I think, is what we have also uncovered in this inquiry.
Well, Chair, to be fair, you'd need to ask the Auditor-General as to the Auditor-General's opinion. My recollection, and I may be wrong on this because I wasn't involved, but in 2021 I'd moved to Sydney Metro, as I mentioned. I do recall that, of course, you've had a series of changes in agencies that then assume the responsibilities, rights and obligations of the previous agency. So WDA was created. When it was dissolved, what was WDA when it became RMS? RMS subsequently became Transport for New South Wales, and I think the Auditor-General's report that you refer to is referring to Transport for New South Wales as it was at the time, but that actually the actions that it was looking at were not entirely Transport for New South Wales, but picked up the predecessor agencies, RMS and the like. I can't comment on the specific report, but I know that Transport for New South Wales, as with all Auditor-General reports, would have had to respond to Parliament once that was published, so the response will be there.
We've got questions from the opposition.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Regan, for coming along today and for your extensive involvement. In the little bit of time I've got left, I just want to go back to a couple of things that you raised in relation to the strategic business case. So Transport for New South Wales, or as it was at that time RMS, or its whatever iteration it was, would have had, would it not, significant input into the strategic business case?
Absolutely.
Can you just elaborate on that and the options and how that would have evolved? Would it be the case that they would say, this is the option that we propose, and ERC or Cabinet sits around and says, no, we want to do this? It's a process, isn't it? And a very comprehensive strategic business case.
It is a process, and I think from my understanding is the strategic business case sets out a lot of detail on the options that were considered, and each of those options would have had input and advice from experts within agencies, from external experts, and they get narrowed down, and ultimately recommendations are made or decisions are taken. But it was a pretty extensive exercise with a lot of input from a lot of people. And whether decisions in hindsight were right or wrong, the process was very robust in terms of the decision making and the level of detail that went into it, and it went up ultimately to government for decision.
And consideration of traffic flows and impact, ultimately, it seems from your evidence, was driven in the end, the final decision, by the idea that it would link up ultimately with this sort of alignment to the north. Is that your understanding, or was it
very much so, that the connections to the north and the south, so in the south with the M6 and the Sydney Gateway and the Western Harbour Tunnel, were a key part of the thinking. And you can see in the Roselle Interchange the additional lanes that peel off towards the Western Harbour Tunnel. And so the flows, and when the work is done to look at that, it's done on a network basis. The traffic models look at the network, and they look at the tolled network and the untolled network, and take all of that into account. So certainly, although I wasn't involved, as I said, in those final design decisions, the rationale was about a long-term strategy to connect to that western bypass via the Western Harbour Tunnel.
So while there may be some issues quite clearly around Rozelle Interchange, the fact is it's not complete. That's right, isn't it?
Well, the tunnels are there to connect to the Western Harbour Tunnel, and obviously the Western Harbour Tunnel then connects to the Warringah Freeway, which is being upgraded to accept that connection. And at the time, there was potential consideration of a further extension towards the Northern Beaches. So
I know that well.
yes, so it was being thought of in the context of a longer-term strategy, and that the timing of when each of those might have been done, was still fluid, but it certainly was providing for those future connections and to be delivered when appropriate.
To put it roughly, the cake is not baked yet. That's right, isn't it? To put it very bluntly, I mean, there are parts to link up
certainly,
and to be completed.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not involved in it now, and I haven't had that visibility of what the current thinking is, but certainly the decisions that were made and the advice, you can see it in the 2015 business case, definitely contemplated those other extensions north and south as part of a broader network solution that took pressure off the Harbour Bridge, the Anzac Bridge, the Eastern Distributor, and created greater resilience in the network on a north-south basis, and then connected to those east-west arteries so that you've effectively got the M2, the M4 and the M5 forming that east-west role, and the Eastern Distributor and what then became known as the M8 as the north-south. And that kind of grid-type structure was very much part of the overall strategic thinking, but the detail on all of that was being progressively designed.
But it's not, if I can put it correctly, it's not like a minister sits there with a box of crayons and says, I want it to go that way. This is a comprehensive process designed over time to link into ultimately, can I summarise perhaps the motivation to take that pressure, as you say, off the Harbour Bridge?
And there were lots of other
tunnel.
options considered as well, including different alignments, both north and south. And I'm not privy to sort of all the details as to why one was chosen over the other, but it was an extensive analysis of lots of different options, different angles, different directions, different connection points.
And a very large addition to have a third harbour crossing.
Absolutely. I think the Western Harbour Tunnel project was always then regarded as although it has a different name, as effectively a fourth stage of the WestConnex project, in the same way that the extensions to the south, like the Gateway project, and the M6, were added to that. So it was being looked at a network, but what was unclear at the time is when it would all be built, and so it was designed for the future.
I have two other topics just to touch on. You talked about you referred to the 10 tolling principles. Are you able to table that for the committee? And I think you referred to one of those, that untolled roads remain available. If you're able to provide that to the committee at the end, or on notice.
I think if I could just give me a moment.
That's okay. So there were...
It's the tolling principles are in the 2015 updated strategic business case. I think around page 192.
Around, thank you. 192, that's excellent. Thank you very much. So was it the case that those principles had to be complied with? They formed part of the intent of the design?
Yes, those principles and the detail around how they were put together, they also were a cabinet decision, so obviously cabinet in confidence as to sort of some of the thinking, but the tolling principles, and it sets it out in the publicly available document, were used across the design of the tolling for WestConnex, NorthConnex, the M6 considerations, around future extensions. And they were very much how the decisions at the time were being considered and evaluated, and so to try and achieve a degree of consistency of approach.
Parts of those are free, are they not, when we're getting to tolling and the Iron Cove?
That's right. I mean, the Iron Cove link itself, to answer the previous question a little further, I mean, it was untold. It was a deliberate decision that the government made to have that untold, to provide that continued free connection through to the Anzac Bridge from Victoria Road.
If you were seeking to maximise the revenue from this infrastructure, you wouldn't include a free bit, would you?
No,
as a Treasury guy.
I think from a traffic times toll calculation point of view, there would have been more revenue available if that had been tolled. That is correct.
Could this project have been built without this financing model, given the context that you gave about it being post-global financial crisis, the lack of appetite for taking on this risk, and given the background of, I think Mr Namva referred to other motorway projects, given the history of the Cross-City Tunnel, which was in fact insolvent not once but twice, in that history, knowing that precedent in the context of the global financial crisis and the market's appetite, is that what gave rise to this financing model, or were there other alternatives for the government to take on?
There was no capacity for private sector financing of toll roads in Australia at the time, and even globally, that was very little capacity. So the model was different in its front end, but with the objective of trying to tap the private capital as the long-run owner in the future. Clearly, it was a decision of the government of the day. The alternative would have been the government paid for it directly.
Could that have been done?
Well, the question mark as to what priorities were made at the time, but certainly there was a strong focus on protecting the credit rating and the position of the government. So the objective of the financing strategy was to look to ways to access conventional private capital when that capital was available, and elsewhere in Australia other models had to be used. In Victoria there was a major road done which would have been a toll road but ended up with the government paying directly for it, the Peninsula Link motorway. So this model was different, and to kind of quarantine the asset aside until the private sector was in a position to be able to take it when it was further developed. And certainly that and the combination of the additional financing that was put in place allowed it to be accelerated.
With your Treasury experience in place, that is not just for the fun of selling it off, it is for, is it not, as you said, the context of the rest of the priorities of the budget?
The objective of the strategy was to allow it to be built more quickly.
And to minimise, to take that risk
and to free up capital for other infrastructure.
So it could have been built exclusively by the government taking all of the risk, but to the exclusion of other projects the New South Wales infrastructure pipeline.
Yeah. So they were trade-off decisions made at the time, but certainly this freed up capital for other purposes.
And that was informed by Infrastructure New South Wales, which is the body set up to...
So Infrastructure New South Wales provided the initial idea for and we're thinking on the design. The work on the financing strategy was done by Treasury at the time. But all of that was brought together, and you can see in the creation of the different entities, the WestConnex Delivery Authority, to run forward with the procurement and the delivery, the SMC, to set up the financing, that was the product of that thinking.
And so, just to be absolutely clear, was it the intent to have more or maximise the tolling funneled through this project?
No, I think one of the key experiences and one of the key objectives of the way that the roads were being considered at that time was very much on a principle that there would be no funneling of traffic into toll roads.
Given that the previous precedent was to have a tunnel funnel in the Cross-City Tunnel, which didn't seem to work.
The experiences on previous projects in Sydney, Cross-City Tunnel, Lane Cove Tunnel to an extent, and in Brisbane, where arrangements were considered potentially along those lines, had not been successful, and those projects had all gone into receivership. So the intent here was to, as I said, to always ensure that there were alternative free routes available, and that what the financing arrangement was to be able to access private finance in the future when it was available. But in the interim, the government was paying, but it was paying with the intent that it would recycle that capital.
Thank you. My last question, do you have any experience of anyone from Penrith complaining about WestConnex?
I wouldn't in my current role, no.
All right, but there's clearly some issues around Roselle and the way forward.
Okay, we'll see if we can get one more or two more questions in. Mr. Regan, are you aware of what people were saying back in 2015 in relation to the Rozelle interchange option, that they were calling it the Regan option?
No, I don't recall it. I think, as I said, there are lots of people who were involved in SMC and WDA. I think there was a particular there may have been a particular curve, I think it's referred to jokingly as the Regan curve, but it was not the interchange itself.
And so before you said Infrastructure New South Wales provided the design, just to be clear, is your evidence here today that Infrastructure New South Wales provided the design and pushed for the Rozelle interchange?
No, that's not my evidence.
No.
My evidence is that Infrastructure New South Wales did the original work back in 2012.
Right. Well, I think my question to you before was
Yeah.
about the Rozelle interchange design.
Yeah.
You said Infrastructure New South Wales. So where did that design
no,
come from in terms of pushing that?
I'm sorry, Chair. The original work was done by INSW, and that's what I said around back in 2012. The work in 2014, as has been evidence been tabled to lead to the work of the strategic business case in 2015, was done and taken to government by RMS, but with significant involvement of Sydney Motorway Corp and previously the WestConnex Delivery Authority. There was then further decisions in 2017 made and taken to government by RMS, again in conjunction with work with the Sydney Motorway Corporation around subsequent changes, Camperdown ramps, north-south links. But that was all being done and taken up through the respective agencies. And with multiple options considered for all of those. I am not surprised, as on every major infrastructure, different experts will have different opinions. And certainly the
And
concept...
was your opinion that Rozelle interchange should be built?
Well, I'm not a traffic engineer.
When you were heading up at the Sydney Motorway Corporation,
Yeah.
my last question,
It-
sorry, we're out of time.
No, that's fine.
Was it your opinion that Rozelle interchange should be built? Did
That
you
decision,
push that?
that decision was made after I left.
Thank you. That is unfortunately the end of our time today. We can, of course, put questions in on supplementary questions, or if you've taken anything on notice, but please note that answers to any questions on notice and supplementary questions will be due 7 days from when you receive the transcript rather than the usual 21 days because of the timeline of this committee. Thank you so much, Mr. Regan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
To our next witness, Councillor Ferguson, we'll get you sworn in before we begin. So if you could please state your name and position, title, and either an oath or an affirmation, which I understand the words are in front of you.
So it's Councillor Andrew Ferguson, City of Canada Bay Council. I don't appear as a representative of council, but as a individual elected by the community to represent the interests of residents, but also as a resident of the council area. And I'd like to take the oath if I could, please.
Thank you. Have you got that in front of you? The words?
Yeah.
Yes.
I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you very much. Now, Councillor Ferguson, do you have a short opening statement for the committee?
I might say a few things if I could, please.
Please.
So I might say at the start that I left home at 6:02 this morning, and I drove west to North Strathfield and entered the tunnel and arrived at Barangaroo, where I park at 6:22. So it's a pretty good run for me. But I do want to say most residents in the City of Canada Bay Council don't have that opportunity because of the cost of the tunnel. Certainly people that suffer social and economic disadvantage have no such opportunity, and most residents suffering from the cost of living don't have the opportunity to simply go backwards, go west and catch the tunnel, and they're forced to drive through the suburbs of Canada Bay Council area and onto the gridlock of Victoria Road. But my experience, and I'd say that I'm not suggesting that WestConnex has failed Sydney. I think there'd be compelling arguments. There's certainly net gains for many residents in terms of commuting to our great city centre and going home of an evening. but I do say it has failed miserably the constituents of the state electorate of Drummoyne, and I also say very clearly it's failed miserably the ratepayers and the residents of the city of Canada Bay. And I'm particularly concerned at the impact on not just Drummoyne residents, but residents more broadly in my council area, residents in Five Dock, in Warimba, in Abbotsford, that all suffer the consequences of the gridlock and the failure in terms of the Rozelle Interchange on our local community. I'm happy to elaborate on any issues. I don't have all the answers, but I'm very pleased to be a spokesperson for the community and to make sure the voice of Drummoyne residents is heard very clearly at this inquiry.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll go to questions from government members first, actually, for this one. Mr.
Thank you,
Buttigieg.
Chair. Councillor, thank you for appearing. Could you maybe just give us your perspective on how this came about in terms of we've got a problem, obviously, which has been manifested by the residents, and you're here representing, in your role as councillor, their view and being a local resident yourself. Could you just outline for us the crux of the problem and to what degree you think it's fixable and how? I'm just trying to get a sense of the history, because we've heard a lot of evidence on the committee to date about the structural flaws and the incentives for designing this road in a certain way, given that, you know, there was revenue to be made by the private operators. I just want to get your sense of what the residents feel about how that structural design came about and whether or not, A, it could have been done in a better way, but B, what can we do now?
I listen to residents. I also read emails that I receive, and I also monitor local social media, which is a real opportunity for a representative to get a feel for how residents think and feel about issues. I would think most residents would be of the opinion that the government, Transport New South Wales, failed in design, and probably there was a net gain for people in Sydney, but not for our local area. And I'm sure that's the opinion, and that opinion is reinforced by the fact that they suffer the consequences. I avoid Victoria Road in the morning. I travel early and I go in a different direction to avoid the gridlock, and they suffer the consequences, the gridlock, the rat running, the frustration, the delays in commuting to the city. So I think it's failed in terms of their needs. I don't think it was deliberate, but pretty clearly the last government failed in terms of some design issues that led to perhaps an unintended consequence for an important part of the Sydney community.
Okay. And so do you think there was any conscious sort of awareness about, you characterise it as a net gain? In other words, look, we've got to do this, it's got to stack up financially for the private operator, there's a net gain to the vast majority of Sydney-siders, so Drummoyne and Abbotsford and surrounding suburbs will have to suck it up. I mean, how much do you think that pervaded the thinking?
Well, point of order, Chair.
Point of order's been taken.
I don't want to interrupt the flow at all, and I understand what you're getting at, but I'm not sure that this witness has capacity to be able to talk about the decision makers. He can talk about the residents in the area, absolutely.
To the point of order, I think the witness is entitled to speak about whatever the witness wants to speak about. There is no point of order.
Well, Chair, I just think the question was directed to the decision makers and the design.
Yeah, there's no point of order.
Capacity.
Members are entitled to ask whatever questions they like, really, as long as they're within scope, and this was well within scope, and the witness can respond if the witness is able to. Of course, if the witness is unable to answer the question, he does not need to answer the question. Of course, he can take a question on notice. Please proceed.
I think I'm not in the opinion to actually comment on the design. I'm not a transport expert or a well-paid consultant. I'm a layperson on the issue, like a lot of people in the community. But I think the net gain is always important, but there's not just a net gain for Sydney, there's a considerable disadvantage for the constituents of the electorate of Drummoyne and the ratepayers of Canada Bay, and they've got the right to be outraged, and they've got the right to make sure their voice is heard in this inquiry.
So, Councillor, can you tell us about this this meeting, which has caused quite a bit of attention on the 18th of March. You were instrumental in organising that, weren't you, this public meeting?
I had been inundated with representations from local residents concerned about all sorts of traffic issues, in particular Victoria Road, which is a state government road, and following the opening of the Rozelle interchange. I dutifully referred all those inquiries to the State Member of Parliament because very clearly it's a state-based issue, even though I have an interest in the issue. But eventually those residents came back to me. They didn't feel their voice was being heard, and they asked me to do more. And I listened very carefully, and I hesitated on the issue, but I finally took the opportunity to organise a public meeting that was held in mid-March. I, in fact, printed at my own expense 2,000 leaflets, and in my own time in the evening after work, I distributed 2,000 leaflets to the residents of Drummoyne East. I was adamant that the residents were going to have a voice, and their voice was going to be heard by government, and it was a very successful meeting on very short notice in a Craig Laundy hotel on Victoria Road, where more than 150 residents turned up. But I want to say probably the most important thing was not those residents just identifying their concerns, but in fact starting to organise themselves. I think they felt government was failing them. The state government, Transport New South Wales, their voice wasn't being heard locally. The local council wasn't speaking up. So they formed a local resident committee to make sure that it wasn't just a public meeting of grievances, it was a public meeting of action. And the formation of that committee, I believe, is an important part of the solution here for Drummoyne, which at some point I'd like to elaborate if there's an opportunity.
So overall, that meeting, despite some of the criticisms that it's come under for various, from various perspectives, was served as an effective clearinghouse for the whole community, because I understand it was attended by all sides of politics, all sectors of the community. Would you say it served its purpose?
I might say at the outset, I'm not aware of any controversy. I've never heard one resident or ratepayer raise any criticism. Nothing but endorsement for taking the initiative of organising a public meeting to make sure the voice of residents was heard, to make sure a representative committee was formed. And in fact, it was very well attended by members of Parliament, prospective members of Parliament, the Mayor, the General Manager of Council, and a very broad cross-section of the community. And there's certainly no Labor-Liberal issue here. It was very well received by everyone.
Can I ask you...
Last question, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So in coming out of that meeting and the subsequent public discourse that's happened since, in your view, what are now the biggest things the state government could do to ameliorate what is, in effect, a structural issue that's been inherited?
I think the word mitigate is the best word that we can choose. I don't think we can solve this crisis, but I think government and rightfully listens to transport experts and traffic management experts and engineers, but I think the real experts are people that live and breathe the problem 24/7. I think that ordinary people, they're not all tertiary qualified, they don't have degrees in engineering, but they have invaluable knowledge about issues, and I've seen the evidence of that in many of the submissions that have been brought to the inquiry here. And I know a number of residents are also speaking here today. They were elected by the people, and I think government needs to listen more to the community. And I might say as a councillor, I sometimes glaze over whenever I get anyone from Transport New South Wales go to a council meeting. I think the exercise is really ticking the box, going through the motions. I don't think people are listening, and listening is not hearing words, it's understanding the words, understanding what's being said, and understanding the feelings and passion of people about the problem, and following up. Government fails miserably, and I think the most important thing is giving the residents a voice, and Transport New South Wales ensuring that the Drummoyne Residents Committee is not just at the table, but they're listened to, there's site visits with them to follow up the detail of their issues to make sure that they have the proper input from what I regard, in my definition of experts, is ordinary people that live and breathe this problem.
Thank you.
Secondly, I just want to say funding of initiatives by the City of Canada Bay Council to identify the issues and problems that will help mitigate the consequences of the opening of the Rozelle Interchange, and most significantly, funding those initiatives to make sure we mitigate as best we can for the constituents of Drummoyne and Canada Bay.
Thank you. We'll go to questions from the opposition. Ms Ward.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson, for coming along for your submission, and sorry for the heartache that the community has experienced in this process. Can I ask though, you about your engagement with Transport and the meeting that you did obtain? Are you aware that the local member, Stephanie De Pasqua, the member for Drummoyne, the state member, wrote to the Minister and requested meetings repeatedly? I think there were some 8 or 9 letters seeking a meeting, and she wasn't able to secure such a meeting. And yet, miraculously, you got a meeting on a Monday night with Transport for New South Wales. Did you invite local members, or did you work with others to do that, or how did that come about?
I'm aware the local member on December 1 wrote an email, a letter to the Minister, and a response in March. I'm not aware of all the details of the follow-up, but I might say that in terms of my ability to contact government, Mark Buttigieg is the duty MLC for Drummoyne, and I didn't write one email to Mark. I wrote him many emails, not over 4 months, but over 4 days. I texted him, I emailed him, I rung him, I was persistent, and I was going to ensure one way or another there was a meeting with Transport New South Wales to front up and deal with the concerns of local residents, and I don't apologise for that.
No, I'm not asking you to, but you're a Labor-aligned councillor, that's correct, isn't it?
That's most definitely the case. I'm a life member of the party.
Yeah, and so you were able to secure a meeting through some texts and phone calls to a member. The local member who'd written politely, repeatedly to the Minister wasn't getting a response, but you were able to secure a meeting quickly on a Monday night, which I don't think she was even invited to. She found out from a member of the public. That's not really being collaborative, is it? When you're talking about everyone coming along and everyone attending, this really should be across all of politics, all levels of politics, to try and get everybody involved in this. That's correct, isn't it?
In fact, I did that, and I've got a copy of a text exchange with Stephanie De Pasqua, who's the State Member of Parliament. I also arranged reserve seating for the State Member of Parliament at the front of the meeting, and gave Stephanie De Pasqua the opportunity to speak. I also had reserved seating for the Liberal Mayor of the City of Canada Bay Council, and guaranteed that he would also speak at the meeting. I also spoke to residents who I knew had spoken to Stephanie, because I received a text message, and the main point of the text message was that she would like to jointly convene the meeting with me. But in fact, it was my initiative, and I know many members of Parliament organise public meetings. They're not always jointly convened with another party, so I think I proceeded the best I could to make sure the voice of residents was heard.
Yeah, but you got a fast track, didn't you, to a meeting, and took credit for that, when perhaps a collaborative approach amongst all community might have been more optimal and might have happened sooner. But nonetheless, I'll move on.
I might say I didn't take credit for it. I did my job as a local representative. I was persistent, I didn't give up, and I never do.
So you called your mate Mark Buttigieg. You said, mate, I need a meeting on this, and got the meeting when the Minister wasn't, or Transport wasn't going to engage with the local member, but you did get a meeting on a Monday night upstairs in a pub. It's not really conducive to being inclusive and accessible, is it? I mean, really, a community meeting perhaps at the council chambers might have been more accessible to the public, with notice and letting everybody know that it's not just yours and a Labor mates meeting, it's actually a community meeting with the local member focused on solutions. Wouldn't that be the better approach, and would you encourage that in the future?
I'll just say respectfully, I'm not convinced the hotel was not a good venue. I, in fact, consulted residents about the best possible venue in the area, and I was advised, and I don't know the area that well, I live in a different part of the LGA, and the advice from local residents was the hotel was the most central location. In fact, it's at the epicentre of the problem, on the corner of Lyons Road and Victoria Road. And I, in fact, rang the former federal Liberal Member of Parliament, Craig Laundy, who immediately said, great idea, Andrew, the hotel will be available for your public meeting. And the residents found it the best possible location.
Good,
the council chambers is not appropriate because it's not large enough for 150 people.
but it wasn't upstairs, wasn't perhaps ideal for access to people, but I'll move on.
I didn't solve every problem, and I apologise. I did the best I can. I don't have any staff. I just took the initiative after consulting local residents.
It's just curious. It's a curious matter, but nonetheless, Labor mates get a fast track.
And I don't accept Mark's a mate.
All right,
Chair.
I'll move on to
Mark,
Point of order.
A point of order has
MLC.
been
Chair,
taken
we
by
have
Mr. Buttigieg.
very, very specific questions which the witness is answering very surgically
my
and
time.
precisely, and then we have this
my
political
time.
commentary on top of it.
Well, it's the it's the case.
Are
It's the
you
fact.
asking questions, or is this...
So the
is
local
this-
member writes
is this-
8 letters
is this
and
a
can't
sitting
get a
of the upper
meeting,
house?
and your mate emails you and gets a
I've
meeting.
heard the point of order. It wasn't really a point of order, so we'll just continue. But
I'll be
I'll just
constructive.
remind the member that just for Hansard, we'll try not to speak over
Thank you.
witnesses when they're giving their evidence.
Thank you. Can I move on to something positive? Because I think we all want to be constructive here, and that's what we do agree on, is that we need solutions. So can I turn to your solution? And you have helpfully at the end put a sentence in about Parramatta ferry services. Can you speak to that and whether you've had any success engaging with Transport for New South Wales about expanding the Parramatta River ferry services to provide that better option for commuter access?
I think that is one of a suite of many options available for government, and I think enhancing public transport, be it buses or ferries, is an important part of it, and that's about increasing the number of ferry services along the route.
So you've
Also-
called for, just to be specific, you've called for additional services.
Yeah, expanding the number of ferry services,
Yep.
that's additional services.
Yep.
And also looking at Birkenhead Point, where
Yep.
ferry services were curtailed many years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and whether or not government or the private sector can provide some services to encourage people to use public transport rather than driving to and from work in the city or beyond.
So you'd be calling on the government to put in additional services. You've said specifically from Drummoyne, Abbotsford, Chiswick, Cabarita and Birkenhead. So specifically you're calling on those additional services to be implemented as part of the solution. To
Most
this.
definitely, that's what I've put in my submission, and I've reaffirmed that today.
And have you engaged with Transport for New South Wales about that?
I have written to the state government on the issue. I haven't had any meetings, and I haven't asked the duty MLC to arrange that as well. I know the Federal Labor Member of Parliament, Sally Situ, is in fact also made representations, and I knew I would have the opportunity here today to say very clearly we need increased ferry services and we need additional services from ferry stations that no longer have ferries stop at their ferry
I think
station.
the local member, the state member also, the state member for Drummoyne has called for additional ferry services. I think that's something you very clearly agree on, and she's been emphatic about that as well. That's correct,
I can
isn't it?
assume it, and I've got no doubt that the state member is doing her job, so she should.
And those additional services, as you say, would take some of the traffic off Victoria Road. Is it your, do you propose going forward to engage further with Transport to seek to progress those proposals in
As
your
I said,
capacity as a councillor?
As I said at the outset, and I'm actually convinced you know this to be true, I'm very persistent and I intend to take up the issues for the constituents of Drummoyne and the residents of Canada Bay Council area.
You might ring your duty MLC and get him on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You done? Councillor, is it your view, just based on speaking to residents, that quite a few have started changing their behaviour, the times in which they go to work? I think you yourself talked about leaving very early, that they've changed their behaviour based on the inconveniences that Roselle Interchange has caused them since its opening. Have you witnessing that within your local area?
I've never had a feedback from a resident saying they're specifically looking at going west to go east, but that opportunity is only available to those that live closer to the Strathfield area rather than the Drummoyne area. And I think it's cost prohibitive for many people, certainly people, as I said earlier, that suffer social and economic disadvantage, and certainly not an option for those that are suffering from the cost of living, let alone paying an extra $60 or $80 a week on toll fees. I haven't witnessed that change in behaviour.
Okay, because there's other changes in behaviour, of course, such as those who can, working from home or trying to avoid those hours that are particularly bad. Not necessarily changing the route to go in, but changing the time of travel or indeed travelling less. Have you heard any of that?
I specifically haven't heard that,
Okay.
but I'm hopeful that's the case, and that helps to mitigate some of the consequences.
Yeah, so what have you heard, say, over the last month in relation to the impacts on local streets and rat running? This inquiry has been going for several months now. Has it eased? Are things getting better? What are people saying? Give us an example, say, for the last few weeks.
I also haven't had specific feedback on that. I'm very pleased that Claudia Campbell and Simon Gatwood, who live in this area, are giving evidence today. And in fact, I did speak to Claudia this morning that she took some video evidence at 8:15 or 8:30 verifying her concerns about rat running. And I have had no feedback from residents that the situation is ameliorating in the area.
Okay. All right. Do the
I've got
government
one more.
members
Actually,
have
I've got one more, Chair.
further questions? We'll go, okay, one more, and then if you've got
Sure.
further ones until the time's up.
Thank you. Just in terms of progressing, I note you've not put any, so you've said I don't venture solutions for the gridlock delays and traffic chaos. So you have no proposals as a councillor or as a resident for traffic proposals. But if I might then get to the proposal that you do make, and that is in relation to those ferry services. So will you be calling on and contacting the Transport Minister, Joe Halen, to ask for those additional services?
I might deal with the first part of your question. I certainly am not a traffic expert, but I've read all the submissions, specifically from Drummoyne, and I endorse all of them because they come from people that observe and feel the issues. And I know some, when they're tested and may fail, but overwhelmingly there's been so many propositions put forward here about one-way streets and directing traffic and traffic signalling and so on. So they're all good options that I endorse, subject to the testing process. I certainly do say that the most important thing from my point of view is the traffic study funded by state government. It's the funding of the mitigation solutions that arise from that. And I say most significantly, listening to the local residents, not pretending to listen, but to sit down with them and make sure that they have the best possible voice at the table. And I have been, as you're aware, and will continue to be a strong advocate. And I'll specifically raise the issues with the Duty MLC for Drummoyne.
Why wouldn't you
That's
write
his
to the
responsibility,
Transport
Mark
Minister?
Buttigieg.
Yeah, you've
And I
got.
can also supplement that by sending an email to the Minister
Yeah.
as well, and I'm very happy to do that, and I have in the past, and will continue to do that.
I would have thought that that would be the appropriate mechanism, given she's responsible for it. She's the Transport Minister. You've advocated for additional services. That
questions. I know.
would be the faster opportunity to seek
you've
the
got
outcome,
3 minutes,
the constructive outcome that you're seeking here, isn't it?
Like you and all your life's experiences, you know that you wouldn't just do one thing when you can potentially do 5 things. We've got a Duty MLC, which is Mark Buttigieg.
No, but I've asked specifically about Joe Halen.
Sorry, he's my point of contact.
Uh-huh.
And as I said very clearly, I will continue to liaise with the Duty MLC for Drummoyne. In addition to that, I have in the past, and I will in the future, also make direct representations to the relevant ministers.
All right. Would you
Okay,
provide
all
a
right,
copy
let's
of that
go
letter to the committee?
Questions now from
So I just want to ask if you'd provide a copy of that representation to us
Sorry, I
to
couldn't hear
assist.
you.
So would you provide a copy of that once you do your representation? Are you able to provide that to the committee?
If
Joe
the
Halen?
Chair thinks that of some value, I'm happy to do that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Well,
be
yeah,
guided
if
by
members
the Chair.
ask for it. Great, thank you. We'll go to questions for the
Councillor,
last 2 minutes.
just to follow up on that line of questioning, it's somewhat unremarkable, isn't it, that you mentioned you're a life member of the party, you're a Labor councillor, everyone knows that you're on council under the Labor branding. It would be highly unremarkable that you use your knowledge and contacts and the fact that I'm the Duty MLC to get your representation from the community through to government. I mean, this wouldn't be fast-breaking news, wouldn't it, that this is one of the things you do?
Does if you don't include
contacts
the
available
local
to you.
member.
It would be bizarre. In fact, it would be absurd. I'm elected by the local community to do the best I can, and I'll make representations to a Liberal government or a Labor government, to a Member of Parliament I know, or to a minister. I might say, with all due respect, I made representations to the last Liberal government. I didn't always get a timely response, but I was persistent, and I'll continue to be persistent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. That's the end of your time here. If you've agreed to take anything on notice or if the committee has any further supplementary questions, they will be due 7 days from when you receive the transcript rather than the usual 21 days. The Secretariat will be in touch with you about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present
Thanks
today.
so much.
All the best for the deliberations.
Thank you. And if you've got a hard copy of your opening statement there, could we have... No, you didn't have one.
Got some scrappy notes.
Yeah. We don't want your scrappy notes. We will continue. Sorry about that short break. Dr. Standen will begin by swearing you in. If you could state your name and position, title, please, and swear either an oath or an affirmation.
Yes, good morning everyone. I'm Dr. Christopher Standen. I'm a research fellow in urban development at the University of New South Wales, Sydney. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thanks very much. Now, do you have a short opening statement for
I
the
do.
committee? Thank you.
Yeah. So, yes, I've been working in the planning and transport sector for 20 years, initially in government and for the last 11 years in academia. My areas of expertise include transport economics, travel behaviour and transport modelling. I do own small shareholdings in Transurban and Tesla through my superannuation fund. I have no other conflicts of interest to declare. I've been following the WestConnect scheme since its announcement, and from the early days, I and other independent transport experts warned that the promised benefits would not be realised. It gives me no pleasure to say we've been proved absolutely right. For example, the business case promised reduced congestion, but WestConnect has induced traffic growth and more congestion, as has every urban road expansion project that has come before it. The business case promised the renewal of Parramatta Road, but the traffic volume today is about the same as it was before WestConnex opened, thwarting plans for a tree-lined livability corridor. The business case promised less traffic on suburban roads, but the new toll concessions on the old M4 and M5 motorways, which were given to WestConnex as a deal sweetener, have forced thousands of cars and trucks on suburban roads such as Forest and Stony Creek roads in Bexley. At the same time, the new interchanges have generated additional traffic in their surrounding neighbourhoods and on the broader surface road network. The business case promised economic benefits. However, the government sold WestConnex at a multi-billion-dollar loss. It spent $4 billion on the Rozelle interchange before handing it over to WestConnex Transurban. The government is spending a further $10 billion on the airport link and the Western Harbour Tunnel. In addition, motorists and businesses will pay an estimated $65 billion in WestConnex tolls over the next 37 years, much of which will be paid by taxpayers through toll subsidies. WestConnex construction has contributed to a skilled labour shortage, which has pushed up the costs of much-needed rail projects and housing construction, which in turn has put upward pressure on inflation and interest rates. So my written submission to this inquiry primarily addressed the traffic modelling undertaken for WestConnex and the Roselle interchange. I want to begin by saying that city transport and land use systems are extremely complex. You have millions of people and households making billions of decisions about how often to travel, what time to travel, where to travel, how to travel, which route to take, and then where to live, where to work, where to send their children to school, and so forth. And you have thousands of businesses making decisions about where to locate, what areas to service, and how to move their goods around. And all these decisions are influenced by dozens of variables, including road congestion levels. So basically, no computer model can possibly predict how a major change to the transport network would affect these billions of decisions and variables. Not when it opens, and certainly not 37 years into the future as the WestConnex traffic modelers claim to be able to. And that's why traffic forecasts for all past major road projects have all been out by a large margin. Now, the modelling methodology used for WestConnex was not fully described in the publicly available reports, but from the few details that were provided, I would say it was far from best practice. It didn't consider most of the household and business travel and location decisions I've just mentioned, and it ignored some important feedback effects. Now, universities must take some of the blame for this. We continue to teach these unvalidated modelling methods and to pass them off as an exact science, knowing they have a long history of providing unreliable forecasts. But as well as using these flawed methods, the WestConnex traffic modelers also made a huge error in their assumptions. They assumed Parramatta Road would be narrowed from 6 to 4 general traffic lanes after WestConnex opened. This capacity reduction was never part of the proposal and has obviously not happened. And because of this error, the model predicted Parramatta Road volume would fall by about a third, which clearly hasn't happened either. The consequences of this are that the model also predicted less traffic approaching the Roselle interchange and Anzac Bridge via the Parramatta Road City West Link corridor. And this would partly explain the long traffic queues observed on the City West Link after the interchange opened. And because all the forecast economic, environmental, climate and health impacts in the environmental impact statement were all based on these fudged traffic forecasts, these were all wrong as well. Now, this error was pointed out in many submissions during the public consultation, including mine and the City of Sydney's, but it was never fixed. I suspect this error was made intentionally, so that it could be claimed in the business case that WestConnex would reduce traffic volumes on Parramatta Road and facilitate its renewal. I suspect this deception was sanctioned at a high level. And I suspect that the Department of Planning, Transport for New South Wales, Sydney Motorways Corporation, the traffic modelling consultants, may have colluded on this deception. So basically, the government spent millions on a business case and environmental impact statement that were a fraudulent fantasy. So I would like to see this inquiry investigate the systemic failures that allowed a fraudulent business case and an unlawful environmental impact assessment to be produced and approved, and expert submissions to be ignored. So for future multi-billion-dollar mega projects, decision makers and the public need to be given honest information about the possible costs and impacts, as well as warnings about the limitations of the forecasting methods used. Though ideally, we should plan cities the other way around. not propose random individual projects, then try to predict how they will affect the future using unvalidated methods that can be easily manipulated to produce the answers you want. Rather, start by deciding what kind of future we want, then work out the projects and policies that will get us there in the most cost-effective way. And I'd like to table an illustration of the Parramatta Road, what was modelled and proposed, and what was built.
Thank you. Could you also, are you able to table your opening statement at the same time?
Yes, I have a copy of that.
It would be great if members could get a copy of that for this session. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Dr. Standen. I wanted to just actually start by asking you that we had former RTA officials present at the last hearing, former RTA as well as infrastructure consultants from Evans and Peck, people that did the modelling. One of them was one of the best traffic modellers, as I understand, according to the witnesses. They said that, in fact, when 15 different options were developed for the northern section, the 15 different options all had traffic modelling undertaken for them.
Thank you.
And their assertion is that WestConnex has had more traffic modelling undertaken than any other road project in Sydney, firstly. And your evidence here today is that the modelling was slightly undercooked.
Yes, it didn't follow best practice, best methods, though I mentioned that no modelling is perfect. It is fundamentally flawed. But yes, in the case, it was also fudged to produce answers that they wanted.
Are you referring to specifically the modelling that was ultimately undertaken, or the modelling used to justify Roselle Interchange, or are you referring to broadly the WestConnex modelling as I've just indicated?
Yes, I'm referring to the modelling that was included in the publicly available reports, because that's all I have access to, the modelling results and methods that were presented in the business case and the various environmental impact statements.
Yeah, and so could you just explain a little bit more for the committee about the modelling when you say that it wasn't really undertaken according to best practice? Is this traffic modelling that is generally, and would have been at the time, generally used across the government, or was it different for WestConnex than what is normally undertaken, firstly?
I can't say, because the methods weren't fully and transparent.
So it's not transparent in terms of how they did it? Right, and so, but you know enough, you're saying it's not transparent, but you know enough to be highly critical of it. So what did it not do?
So, for example, it didn't consider some feedback effects. So it didn't consider how building a new high-speed transport link would affect people's home and work location decisions. So, yeah, if you're presented with a faster link to get into the city, you might take the opportunity to move to a lower-cost suburb further out, which means your travel time doesn't reduce, but your travel distance does.
Now, your evidence today essentially calls the business case fraudulent. That's a big call. Why, just to be clear, why are you saying it's fraudulent?
Mostly based on the assumptions around Parramatta Road. So in the business case, environmental impact statements, all the modelling was based on a proposal where Parramatta Road is reduced from 6 to 4 traffic lanes. That was never part of the proposal. So all the modelling is essentially based on a proposal that's different from what was proposed and approved. So let me give you an analogy. A developer wants to build an apartment block. They want to build a 10-storey apartment block. But in their development application, they do all the modelling, the solar access and things for a 5-storey apartment block. So all their modelling is based on a 5-storey apartment block. That then gets approved. They then go ahead and build the 10-storey apartment block. So a similar thing's happened here.
So isn't it the case then in terms of the Western Harbour Tunnel and Warringah Freeway upgrade, then, that I understand that the traffic modelling for that and the EIS was essentially undertaken with Beaches Link also being built. Have you looked into that and whether this is going to be the same situation there?
Sorry, I haven't looked into it, but I could.
But you can. I have plenty of questions, but I just want to make... Ms
No, you
Ward...
go.
will-
I'll go.
Sorry?
You're the chair. No, you go ahead.
So with the Parramatta Road, you're talking about with the reduction from 6 lane to 4 lanes, the promised revitalisation of Parramatta Road. That's correct. That's what was originally used to sell WestConnex at the time.
Yes, although it never actually formed part
Yes.
of the proposal.
And so what you're saying is the modelling, which was used to justify the business case, which was used to justify the sale, the traffic modelling was never adjusted when Parramatta Road revitalisation was essentially taken out of WestConnex.
Well, it was never in WestConnex. So there was the proposal never said anything about reducing the capacity of Parramatta Road.
So say
But
that again.
it was only the modelling that made that assumption, and the modelling outputs.
And so why was that done, do you think? When you're here again in your opening statement, you suggest that governance failures, you'd like to see this inquiry investigate the systemic and governance failures that allowed a fraudulent business case, as well as an unlawful, I think you called it, environmental impact assessment, to be produced and approved. Why do you think that was the case then, that this all took place?
I can only speculate, but I suspect it was done to make the business case look better, to be able to claim a reduction of traffic on Parramatta Road.
Yes, and do you have views about the decision, I think it was 2017 or 2017, about the Camperdown off-ramp being removed from the Roselle Interchange design in terms of traffic modelling? Because evidence we've heard about that was that decision was made to increase the sale price.
Look, I didn't see the modelling for the scenario with the Camperdown interchange. I've only looked at the modelling for the scenario with the Roselle interchange.
Okay, and so but the Camperdown off-ramp did impact the Roselle interchange. Have you... Because the Camperdown off-ramp impacts the ability, obviously, for cars to come off the ramp, and that was the whole point, we've been told, that off-ramp was removed to increase the flow of traffic and then the number of cars that eventually flow onto Anzac Bridge.
But I'm sorry, I haven't looked at that particular modelling.
Right, that's okay. I'll go to questions from government members. Mr. Mark Buddigee.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Standen, you've seemed to have quite a vast experience in this area, and you say in your submission you've been following this from day one. Can you just outline why it was so obvious that this would be an abject failure, as you put it, I think, in your submission? And you say here it gives you no pleasure to have proven to be right, but why was it so obvious?
Just based on evidence and experience. So I've cited an article in my written submission, Duranton and Turner, which talks about the fundamental law of highway congestion. Basically, if you increase urban road capacity, traffic and congestion increases in proportion.
So, I mean, clearly the government of the day would have made a calculation that, I mean, we heard on evidence earlier today, there was some sort of perhaps view of the net benefit to the greater good, if you like. So what's your view on that? Was there any sort of worthwhile trade-off in terms of, yeah, sure, it's going to cause congestion in spots A, B and C, but overall people will be able to move across the city a lot more quickly and efficiently, so therefore we're going to do it. There's always going to be someone whinge, but government's job is to get things done. What's your view of that?
Okay, so let's look at that ability of some people to be able to move across the city more quickly. So a 3-lane motorway can transport maybe 6,000 people an hour under under optimum conditions. Railway can transport maybe 60,000 people over the same time. So this is in a city of over 5 million people. You're giving the ability of 6,000 of them to travel during the peak hour at high speed, a long distance across the city. To get to that infrastructure and from it, they have to battle through traffic around the interchanges, and they also have to pay for that privilege. So, yeah, in welfare economics terms, someone might be willing to pay $25 to do that journey a bit quicker, but they pay $24 in tolls. They're getting a net benefit of $1 from that. The toll road operator's getting a benefit of $24 from that. The other thing I should mention that in terms of reducing travel times, well, before WestConnex was built, our train system already offered travel times that were better than WestConnex is providing for some people today. And the other thing to consider is that do we really want to give more people the ability to live further from work? So I'm talking about urban sprawl and urban sprawl is associated with increased transportation costs, infrastructure costs, environmental impacts, climate impacts. It's not good for the health of our population to be all spread out and far from services, maybe isolated and lonely in low-density suburbs. So, yeah, while it has given the ability of a very small number of people to travel across the city at high speed, I'd question that if that really is in the overall public good, especially considering the 30 billion whatever cost.
If you accept the government's parameters at the time that it had to be built, or some sort of freeway, motorway had to be built, notwithstanding your reservations on that you've just outlined now, how could it have been done in a better way that would have avoided what the fallout that we're seeing now? And if so, why was that not obvious to the government at the time?
I can't speak for the government. All I remember is that in the Strategic Transport Master Plan, the initial one that was published, WestConnex was never a part of it. It was shoehorned in at a later date and seemed to go against all the objectives and aims of that strategy and various other government objectives. So, yeah, I can't answer for the government, but my question is, what problem were they trying to solve exactly?
Right.
Thank you. Questions from the opposition, Ms Ward?
Thank you. Can I just pick up on that point? Thank you for your assistance today in your submission. When you say it was shoehorned in, do you have an evidence base for that, given that we've heard the involvement of Infrastructure New South Wales, the strategic business case, the comprehensive planning, years of expertise that has gone into designing and delivering WestConnex? What evidence base do you have for it being, as you say, in your words, shoehorned in when you've got Infrastructure New South Wales looking at the overall priorities for New South Wales?
So that the original draft of the long-term transport master plan didn't include WestConnex, and then the final version did.
Sure, but shoehorned is quite a different thing from based on recommendations from Infrastructure New South Wales and experts about a long-term vision, is it not?
Sorry, which experts?
Well, Infrastructure New South Wales, whose task it is to set out the priorities for infrastructure across the whole of New South Wales. That's hardly an afterthought, as it seems.
Well, I'd question their expertise.
All right. You talked about racing across the network and understand the social... I'm trying to understand the social concerns you may have about that, but can we just turn our minds to perhaps a tradie in a ute? He said that there's an alternative to use a train, but a tradie who may have an interest in getting between jobs quickly and efficiently and then perhaps getting home to their family at night may have an interest in using a road quickly. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
And a tradie in their ute, he or she probably can't use a train. That's correct, isn't it?
Some do, but if you have to carry a lot of tools, then yes.
Probably a bit challenging. Okay. So that when you say high speed, the high speed is within the speed limit allocated to that roadway, that motorway. That's correct, isn't it?
Yep.
All right. When you say it's WestConnex has contributed to a skilled labour shortage, that's not the only cause of a skilled labour shortage in Australia, is it?
Correct. I said contributed to.
Right. And when you say it's pushed up the costs of much needed, and I agree with you, much needed rail projects and housing construction, how do you say that that's pushed up the cost of housing construction?
Because labour is a big part of the cost of housing construction, and so if the labour costs increase, the construction costs increase.
Yeah. So WestConnex is not the sole cause, though, is it?
I've said it's contributed to it.
All right. If there were a better way to have designed this, what do you say that would be?
Well, it depends what the aim is. What are you trying to achieve?
What do you say a better design might have been? You don't clearly agree that the current design is working, so what do you say the alternative or better design might have been?
It depends. Well, better design for what? What would you want to achieve?
Well, you tell us. You're saying your submission is that it's not working, it's an abject failure, it hasn't worked and it hasn't realised the promised benefits. What do you say would have achieved that?
What would have achieved which benefits?
Well, you tell us what you think the alternative might be.
It depends on what problem you're trying to solve. If you're trying to solve congestion, road congestion, there are proven ways of doing that through
What are they?
road pricing, for example.
So what are they?
If you're trying to improve people's access to jobs, services, improve tradespeople's access to work, then there are more evidence-based ways of doing that as well.
So can you outline and elaborate what those might be, in your opinion?
Yeah, so improving people's access to education, employment and so forth.
Sorry, did you say education and employment?
Yep. Could be building more affordable and social homes close to where people work.
Rather than WestConnex, is that what you're saying?
I'm not... It's not just one solution. There are multiple things you can do to improve people's access to work, education, social recreational opportunities.
You specifically called out Parramatta Road, so what would have been a better way to have gone about WestConnex to improve Parramatta Road?
Well, yes, do what was modelled, so reduce the capacity and provide high capacity bus rapid transit instead on those two lanes.
But again, a tradie can't use a bus or a train, so how do you propose? What's the alternative? I guess I'm trying to get to something constructive. If this doesn't work, what do you say would have?
We have 5 million plus people in this city.
Yeah.
Not every one of them is a tradesperson.
Understand.
There's more enough road capacity at the moment to handle all the essential traffic, including tradespeople driving to and from jobs.
So not building WestConnex would have resulted in less congestion by putting in, I think you mentioned buses and utilising rail. Is that your submission to this committee?
It's a bit more complex than that.
Okay, explain it to me then.
Again, I'm just trying to understand what it is you're trying to achieve.
I'm asking what your alternative is. You've said that this hasn't worked. I'm just trying to explore options, and I appreciate your assistance for what might be the alternative.
I will take a point of order at this point. The witness has made a submission in relation to traffic modelling. At this point, I think you're almost about to badger the witness. They have to be treated with respect. He's not here to offer a solution and alternative. I think you're well aware of that. If you could redirect your question, or in fact, I might ask in the last 2 minutes.
Okay,
Yeah.
It's not my intention to badger anyone. I'm just trying to get to solutions, and I can't, from your submission, which I'm grateful for, see what you would say the alternative would be.
Well,
Order. I think I've just said to not direct that question to the witness. Mr.
I'm happy
Dr.
to answer
Standard.
it, but in order to have a solution, you have to have a question.
I have. What is the solution?
Order. No.
That isn't a question.
Maybe this was the issue when the coalition was in government for 10 years, that they were asking the wrong questions. Dr. Standen, you say that which I find extraordinary actually, that the modelled road network, this is in your submission, that it did not include local residential streets. So therefore the traffic model that was used was unable to predict the traffic impacts on the streets. So in other words, all of the rat running and everything, the traffic modelling didn't pick that up? I do find that extraordinary.
Yes, the the traffic model didn't include those local streets, and that's quite normal for a strategic level model. They could have done more more targeted modelling on those streets, but neither the state government nor the local governments did, as far as I'm aware.
But given what's happened now and the outcry and inconvenience of so many, that Roselle Interchange has caused so many residents of Drummoyne, Roselle, Balmain, shouldn't the traffic modelling be a bit more extensive, and shouldn't we be looking at that for future projects? What does the government, so not that I think there should ever be any other project like WestConnex built ever, but how do the predicted impacts such as rat running, if they're not brought forward by traffic modelling and understood by traffic modelling, how are they understood?
Yes, well, they could have been foreseen. Yeah. But
So foreseen is different to traffic modelling.
They could have done more modelling of the local street network, but that would have been taken inputs from the strategic modelling, which, as we know, is flawed as well. So it might have given us a bit of a picture of what would happen on local streets, but it wouldn't have told the whole story.
Okay. Thank you. We're actually at the end of our time for you, so thank you very much for your very comprehensive submission and the work you do. If we have any questions or you've taken anything on notice, the Secretariat will be in touch with you, and you'll have 7 days after you receive the transcript as opposed to the usual 21 because of the time frame of this committee.
Yep.
Thank you so much. The committee will now break for morning tea, and we'll be back at 11:45. Thank you. Welcome back, and we'll now welcome our next witness, Dr. Cordaro. We'll start with swearing you in. If you could please state your name and position, title, and either an oath or affirmation.
So I'm Joseph Cordaro, GP, practicing GP, and I take the oath. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Now, do you have an opening statement for the committee, Dr. Cordaro?
Perhaps just briefly, I'm not sure how much information, Madam Chair, that the committee has about me, just about my profile. I'm
Sure.
a long-term resident of Drummoyne of 32 years, and I live in that precinct to the north of Victoria Road, which has been heavily impacted by the Roselle Interchange. I'm a practicing GP, general practitioner, in Drummoyne, and I also own a private practice on Victoria Road in the precinct that is affected by the Roselle Interchange. I have a postgraduate qualification in clinical epidemiology, health economics and public health. I'm a College of the Fellow of GPs, and I'm a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and I've been serving as Deputy Mayor on a local council for the past 12 months.
Thank you. Now, did you have an opening statement as well? Or?
So I guess what I
Yeah.
think what I can bring to the committee is really my personal lived experience, I guess, over the last 5 or 6 months since the interchange opened, as a resident, as a father with family, as a business owner on Victoria Road, and as a councillor of the council in receiving people's feedback, which has been no shortage of in our local government area.
Okay, great. All right, well, we'll proceed to questions then. From the opposition first, Ms. Natalie Ward.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Cordaro, for coming along today. Cordaro, to assist the committee and for your experience. And I'm sorry for the interruption and what you've experienced in this process. Can you talk to the committee about what impact there has been on your business? We'll get to the council issue as well, but from your business perspective, what the impact has been and what engagement you've had with Transport for New South Wales to try and work through some solutions.
In terms of my business as a general practice, as you're probably aware, general practices in Australia are currently well attended, and we don't actually follow the traditional rules of business models. So it would be a far stretch from the truth to say that my bottom line or the business has been affected financially. I certainly saw the effect through the hundreds of patients that I see every week in the anxiety and stress and distress that they were suffering, especially going back to the original opening with delays, being caught in gridlock traffic, and particularly not being able to cross Victoria Road as residents of Drummoyne. So Drummoyne, the suburb of Drummoyne, has 11,000 people in it. About half of them live on the northern or eastern side of Victoria Road, the other half on the other side. And so we're saddled across Victoria Road, and as part of our everyday livability experience, we need to cross that road for many activities. I'm sure you've heard from other invitees to this committee.
Yeah, we've heard evidence that some residents aren't even able to back out of their driveways into their local roads because of the volume of traffic in rat runs. And as you say, that contributes to anxiety and stress. It seems that the combination is quite elegant of you being a resident, a business owner and councillor, bringing together your perspective, if I can pick this part of it, as a local person, so not just the whole of WestConnex and the Roselle Interchange, but the effect on your local area as locals expect to be able to get across, as you say, Victoria Road and interact locally, not just getting on and off of WestConnex. But in terms of solutions or engagement, how's your experience been with engaging with transport, say through council or as a local resident or as a business owner? What opportunities have you had to convey that to them, and what has the response been like?
Well, I'll give you one example. My engagement with Transport for New South Wales has mainly been through the council. Obviously, there's much more opportunity to realistically or significantly engage through my councillor hat. So as a council and a councillor, we have approached Transport for New South Wales over the last 18 months, foreseeing that there would have been increased congestion through Victoria Road, Drummoyne, as a result of the Iron Cove link emptying its traffic onto the eastern side of Iron Cove Bridge. And so suddenly 3 lanes or 4 lanes coming from the old highway through Roselle and 2 lanes from the Iron Cove link suddenly were going to be merged into 3 lanes coming through Drummoyne. Victoria Road Drummoyne has for decades, since I've been there, been increasingly a busy road, noise pollution, air pollution, congestion, and decreasingly livable and pleasant precinct for residents to utilise. And as such, there's been numerous committees set up by council over the past 20 years, of a number of which I've sat on and assisted at a local level, to try and revitalise the Victoria Road precinct, to try and get the Drummoyne Business Chamber to breathe life into the numerous empty commercial premises that have laid derelict and abandoned because business is not viable for other businesses along there apart from health, which is what I do. So we foresaw that this was really going to be the nail in the coffin, having 6 lanes or 5 lanes of traffic emptying onto Victoria Road. So in our engagement, we asked people from members of Transport New South Wales executives to come and speak to us about that. And, you know, there's been numerous contacts, but it's wishy-washy responses that we've had. I've got the transcript of one meeting that we had in August of 2023 in council chambers, where the mayor, a number of councillors and a number of executives from Transport for New South Wales came to answer our questions regarding our concern that the Rozelle Interchange was going to increase traffic congestion. And the responses were, you know, it'll take 12 months for a settling-in period for Rozelle Interchange, which will allow a network review to take place in Drummoyne, and we envisage that will be in the next 12 months and then a 5-year review. There'll be a push towards public transport looking to create a behavioural shift using the B-line model as a model. A business case that will review the full Parramatta to City corridor with a focus on active transport, public transport and pedestrian links to encourage mode shifts. Transport for New South Wales is seeking funding and will advise the group of this progress and timing. There is no current timeline for this proposal. What a joke. We spend $20 billion on a WestConnex tunnel system, and we'll think about when we're going to fund a review of the effect on one of the town centres through which increased traffic is going to go. I mean, we're confronted with that, and we pushed those people at that informal council meeting. And when I say informal, I mean not a public meeting or private meeting. And there was nothing more forthcoming. There's been budget cuts. The Western Sydney Harbour crossing's been axed, has been delayed, part of it was axed and the rest was delayed till 2028. So we've got no money, guys, was the response to do any further studies.
So the responses, it's a bit of cold comfort, if I can perhaps
It's an understatement.
assume. So the response has been people need to adjust their driving behaviour. I think we've heard some evidence that Waze is to blame, or traffic guidance systems are sending people into back roads, they're to blame, and there might be a review in 12 months, there might be one in 5 years. None of that seems to be listening to the community or council, which is putting forward solutions. Probably not your job to provide solutions, probably your job to engage with them and them to provide solutions, other than just sit back and wait and it'll all be okay, don't worry your pretty head about it, which is cold comfort for your residents and you as a business owner. Do you get any sense from Transport that they are prepared to listen to those concrete proposals, or that they're responding comprehensively to those proposals about, we've heard, for example, traffic light sequencing or alternatives, trying to help you, or is it just that same response that wait and see?
I think they respond to a threshold of pressure. If you don't apply enough pressure, there's no response. It's almost as if we're thrown into this social experiment. Let's clog up Victoria Road and see how much will be tolerated by the residents of Drummoyne. And as they scream and squeal, we'll do something about it. We'll tinker with a few traffic lights. We'll see how that goes. Wait a couple of weeks. We don't know what's going on. Council aren't informed of traffic light changes that are made or sequencing changes that are made. We weren't even informed of the change of a 300-metre stretch of previously lane open to traffic on Lyons Road coming onto Victoria Road that was changed into a bus lane without notice. So, on Monday morning, after a weekend of work by Transport for New South Wales contractors, suddenly we get bombarded as a council from residents ringing up, what's happened? There's a bus lane now, I can't get in that lane. And we know nothing about it. So it completely undermines trust in two levels of government.
And I think we've heard that the solution at one point was that Transport said, well, council should go off and do its own traffic study at its own expense.
Absolutely, that's right.
And we've now, during the course of this inquiry, had now an assurance from the Minister only during the course of this inquiry to fund that traffic study. Has that been conveyed to you as a councillor, that Transport will now pay for that traffic study, or has there been any progress on that?
That has not been conveyed to me as a councillor. It doesn't mean that it hasn't happened, but I'm not aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, we do a traffic study now after the whole thing is up and running. What about a traffic study previously to predict, as the previous invitee expressed his sentiments about doing those studies before?
Right. And what would you like to see happen?
At the risk of posing the same question to you as what the last invitee did, I would really like to know what Transport for New South Wales want to achieve with the Roselle Interchange and the West Connects Greater. I actually am a believer in roads. Contrary to the previous speaker, I think that an efficient road system is very important for a large metropolis like Sydney. I think that something needs to happen to discourage people from using Victoria Road as a transport route to the city from the northwestern sector of Sydney. If they're going to use it as another transport route, then it needs to be tolled like the others so that we're all on an equal footing, and our sat-navs, Google Maps and Maps, when we type in from North Ryde how to get to the city fastest, it'll offer us a toll both ways, so that we won't get people diverting away from the Lane Cove Tunnel or from the West Connects just to save $6 or $8. And it's not just $6 or $8, that's quite a substantial cost, and that's why they divert. I mean, all you've got to do is take yourself to Gladesville, North Ryde, Eastwood, and put into Google Maps quickest way to get into Sussex Street, and you'll be taken along Victoria Road.
All right, and one, might finish on this, Chair, unless there's more time. One solution that's been suggested is for more ferries, additional ferry services at some of the points, accepting that that's not suitable for everybody, but potentially may assist with reducing some congestion. Do you support that, and do you have a view about why it would need additional services, not just not just the existing services?
I could never understand why ferry services are so limited from Drummoyne. We've got such a huge exposure to the water, and there are two existing terminals at Birkenhead and Wolseley Street that they would be much better utilised if services were more frequent and had greater capacity. I've experienced that many times, and all my constituents say the same thing.
And we've heard from the local member that sometimes ferries are very full to capacity before they even arrive at those wharves, so additional services might be an option, starting those services in your area might assist with reducing that congestion. Is that something you think the government should, and the Transport Minister should, consider?
Absolutely. It hasn't been just once that I've had to call an Uber from Wolseley Street Ferry Wharf.
Yeah.
Because the full ferry has zoomed by.
All right. I'm happy to keep going.
Thank you.
Come back.
I've got a couple of questions. Dr. Cordaro, were you kind of encouraged by the initial designs of West Connects and Roselle Interchange that portrayed, I understand, part of selling it to the community was this kind of better urban environment for some local residents, but particularly this kind of boulevard that Victoria Road was going to become? Were you, I assume you were very much across that at the time?
Yeah, it's a good question, Madam Chair. Look, there's a vision that Transport for New South Wales published for Victoria Road. The latest two visions were August and November of this year. And
last year, do you mean?
Last year,
yes.
I beg your pardon, yes. Yep. And it talks about revitalising Victoria Road, better connect vibrant town centres, safer and more sustainable travel modes for peoples of all ages and abilities between different town centres, and increase livability of Victoria Road to provide access to different modes of transport while supporting local economies. And
those documents, just to be clear, where are they from? And I'll get you to table them if you're able to,
sure,
as well. But
yes.
where did
Transport for New South Wales Government website.
Okay. All right. And
I was just going to say, those lovely planning and social objective statements were very similar to what was published by Transport for New South Wales for the Parramatta Road Urban Revitalisation Corridor, which I've been intimately involved with over the past 3 years with Canada Bay Council. And it is coming to fruition. It's very slow, and you can see that the progress is slow, but it's all about to happen. And I think it actually will be good. But there's one big difference. There's a 6-lane tunnel sitting under Parramatta Road called the M4 tunnel. And there is no tunnel from Gladesville Bridge to Iron Cove Bridge. And as a number of people who may have made submissions have said, we can't understand why that tunnel wasn't extended that extra 2 kilometres to Gladesville Bridge. It just would have allowed a true transformation of the Victoria Road Drummoyne and Victoria Road Balmain and Roselle precincts.
So is it possible then, can you see the revitalisation of Victoria Road, particularly in terms of getting a lot of that traffic off, reducing the lanes, putting the cycleway there, the trees, everything else that I think has been talked about? Is that on the horizon? Are you aware that that is going to happen, or has it just been basically forgotten about or chucked in the bin?
I'm sure it's been chucked in the bin. Victoria Road is a very limited width. It's barely 6 lanes. Where does this bicycle lane go? I'm not quite sure, unless you take another lane of traffic out of cars. And if you thought the screaming and protests about it being already restricted were loud, if you take another lane away, I don't think that the public of the suburbs out of the Drummoyne catchment or west of Drummoyne will accept that, because it's still being seen as a route to get into the city from outer suburbs.
So what happens then? Because what clearly now it's just a lot more roads to generate a lot more traffic. The community was promised, more open space. They were promised this boulevard, if you like, lots more cycleways. We've had quite a few witnesses talk to us about how disappointed they are that the cycleways haven't really been realised. What is the solution from your point of view for the community to get some of what they've been promised instead of what they have now, which is much more congestion and much more road space?
It just comes down to reducing the number of cars using Victoria Road from Gladesville Bridge to Balmain. Now, how one achieves that social objective and behavioural retraining varies. One can toll it and make it financially unattractive. One could just start narrowing it and force people, make it so painful that people just don't want to use it with a car anymore and decide to go and buy an electric bike. And cyclists are always very happy to push the agenda of using cycling and active transport. But the truth of the matter is, coming from a GP's perspective and with an ageing population, a large proportion of the population will never be able to use a bicycle for transport. It's a leisure activity. So luckily for the advent of electrification and electric bikes, that could be a possibility. And obviously more bus services would be a big plus. I think just reducing the cars along Victoria Road, to answer your question succinctly, is the key to having revitalisation of that corridor.
That's right. I'll just see if there's questions from government members. Mr.
Yeah, thanks,
Buddigee.
Chair. Mr. Cordaro, thank you for appearing. How long have you been on council?
3 years.
So since
Since the last election.
2021.
Short
yeah.
of 3 years, yeah.
Now, to what extent was that council conscious of the likely fallout, given the design and the way that this was going? It's been in the pipeline for quite a long time. Would you be able to describe your awareness as a council as to the likely impacts? Because we've heard on evidence several times now that a lot of this fallout was eminently foreseeable.
The two main impacts were the increased number of cars that were likely to use the Victoria Road through Drummoyne, and the other impact that has occurred is the rat running. We didn't predict the rat running. It was just overlooked, or it wasn't really thought about. Whereas the increased number of cars using Victoria Road was thought about. There was a suggestion to the state governments of the day to extend the tunnel as part of the system to Gladesville Bridge. There's written correspondence between the Mayoral's office prior to my time and Transport for New South Wales, or the relevant minister, to consider extending the tunnel. There was a mayoral minute tabled. that was envisaged. We just thought that a number of lanes, 6, 7 lanes, whatever it is, ending up at 3 lanes at the eastern side of the Iron Cove Bridge, naturally, it's intuitive that it's going to create increased congestion and slow traffic down. It's a bottleneck, and that was foreseen.
So the increased congestion on Victoria Road, and this is in juxtaposition to the supposed rehabilitation, revitalisation of that was definitely foreseen, and council made representations, but the rat running was just overlooked, was it?
Yes, I think so. I think we underestimated the. I didn't. I wasn't part of the council, but council in general, and underestimated how much people are driven by Google Maps and maps every day. When I get out onto Victoria Road, I put in my destination and go by its guidance. And if it means going through back streets, well, that's what I do if I'm an average consumer.
Yeah. And what was the response from the government at the time to those concerns about the increased congestion on Victoria Road?
We envisage, if you read the 750-page environmental effects statement of the WestConnex, you'll find that we're predicting, with the use of multimodal transport, I'm quoting, there might be a reduction in traffic along Victoria Road.
So the government's position was notwithstanding the council's concerns that it'll be fine?
Yes, absolutely.
Did you attend the public meeting in March?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. What was your impression of the meeting?
First of all, I was surprised by how well attended it was. I think everyone was reading off the same page and singing from the same songbook in their frustrations.
Yeah.
And I was disappointed in the lack of response or answers that the representatives of Transport for New South Wales had. I think that they were just relying on the group to do their work for them and tell them what was wrong with the place. And I thought, why haven't they done their homework, and why haven't they, instead of wasting time getting 200 people here, 250 people, and listening to everyone's grievances almost to let them vent, why not just get on with trying to do something and offer something?
That process of venting, of hearing people's concerns, that didn't add any utility to the community's concerns?
Venting always has the utility of making people feel better somewhat.
Yeah, okay. And what about since then, Councillor? Like, what's your impression of the way forward now in terms of... It appears as though there's a general consensus that, given the structural defect of the design, that we've kind of... It is what it is now, we've got it. Going forward, what do you think? How could we ameliorate some of this?
I will air one aspect of sympathy and for Transport for New South Wales, and I guess they're subject to government policy, but I think that a difference will happen with the Western Harbour Crossing, and that Western Harbour Crossing from Iron Cove up to Narrabeen, or the North Shore, that was, if I'm not mistaken, projected to open a year or so after the Rozelle Interchange, and it's been pushed back to 28. So now we've got 4 years of waiting to see what the true vision of the designers of the WestConnex and the Rozelle Interchange, how it transpires, whether it will take traffic off the load coming from the west and the south that went across the harbour, take them off the Anzac Bridge, which if you take traffic off the Anzac Bridge, it'll allow traffic along Victoria Road to flow better and put more cars underground. I don't think that one should be planning to fix this problem until that Western Harbour Crossing is finished. So I think the one thing that could be done is bring forward, not take back, the finishing of that link, because that was part of the whole idea.
Thank you. I might just see if Ms Ward has more questions. I've exhausted mine.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just briefly. So just in terms of the, I guess, the ongoing communication and the opportunity to deal locally with the issue. We understand Transport is dealing with Roselle and dealing with all the other big issues that it might choose to deal with. But what's been the response and the ongoing sort of engagement with Transport about those local issues, about those local roads? How are they purporting to come back to you after that meeting? Will there be another meeting? Have they said we'll look at specific solutions? What's been? They've had a meeting. They've ticked the box. Everyone's vented, but that doesn't result in any changes unless they do something. What's been your impression going forward?
The latest report that I have is that a traffic study ought to be conducted of all the roads, local roads in Drummoyne that are leading to rat running. And
They're giving you a timeline on that. Said we'll start it next week. Obviously, it's urgent. We'd love to get going on it.
I'm not sure they've even given a commitment that they're going to do it or pay for it. I mean, we have the resources in council to do it, but it will cost a couple of $100,000. And I'm not sure, maybe I haven't caught up on my council business matters in the last 7 days.
I think there was only an assurance in this committee, and it's a good one, and we welcome it.
I think,
there
in
will
fact,
be,
the
but
Minister
I think it,
on
yeah,
record
he did.
said he would.
I'm acknowledging that.
In the last
I'm
7
acknowledging
days,
that, Mark.
perhaps?
Yep.
Okay.
But I wanted to understand from your perspective. That's fine to say it to this committee, but it might perhaps be more constructive to say to council, we'd like to get going on that. Do you have any communication? Ignoring the last 7 days, but it's not your impression that it's saying, okay, we're kicking off next week or next month or in the next 6 months.
No,
Okay.
it's not. And yes, and I guess something is better late than never, but it certainly is at a late stage because I guess for those who have commented to this inquiry from the public, they're aware that the options for solutions are very limited.
Any other further community meetings proposed by Transport for New South Wales that you've heard of?
No, I haven't heard of them.
Just
Nothing to
one last one before we...
Just, yes, we'll go to
we've only
the
got
government for the
like-
last
Well, I
question.
do.
Can I just ask,
It's
Mr.
fine.
In the context of my colleagues' questions, has council made representations on the follow-up to the traffic study to the Minister?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
Would you be able to find out for us?
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks.
But you're not going to say no, are you? No, we don't want one. All right, and just closing out on this, in putting people at the centre of what we do, believe that's what we all have in common, and it's something that I'm sure is motivating you to serve on council and certainly in your general practice. What's the feedback from your patients, from your constituents about how they're feeling? Obviously, you're absorbing not only the clinical practitioner side of their stress and concern, but also on council. Is that something that's being alleviated by any of these steps, or are you seeing that playing out still with people, or what's your sort of feel for how people are feeling in the area of Drummoyne?
Yeah, I'm very conversant with a lot of my patients, having been there for 30 years, and we discuss a lot of things of local interest. And look, they're I guess, cynical about what solutions are going to be able to be offered. And it's just, unfortunately, as I've mentioned previously, it's led to increased distrust of government and good governance because they all have a varied opinion about what has gone wrong, ranging from it should never have been built at all to nobody really cares about people in Drummoyne.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Cordaro, for appearing today.
Pleasure.
That's the end of this session. The committee secretary will be in touch with anything you have agreed to take on notice, plus supplementary questions, and you'll have 7 days after receiving the transcript to get them back to the committee as opposed to the usual 21 days because of a tight time frame for this committee. Thank
Fine.
you. We'll
Thank
now
you for your
call our
time.
Thank you.
final witnesses for today's hearing. Welcome. We'll, of course, first begin by swearing you all in. So if we could start on my left with you, Ms. Campbell. If you could all state your name and position title, then either an oath or an affirmation. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Claudia Campbell. I am co-chair of the Drummoyne Residents Traffic Committee. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thanks so much. Mr Gatwood.
Hi, Simon Gatwood. I'm the co-chair of the Drummoyne Residents Traffic Committee. I solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thanks so much. Mr Coleman.
46-year residents of Drummoyne, St George's Avenue, St George's Crescent. I swear the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. And just to be clear, just to state your full name.
Roger Dennis Coleman.
Thank you. Okay, now in terms of short opening statements, is one of you providing that for the committee? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide evidence today on the impact of the Roselle Interchange to the residents of Drummoyne. As co-chairs of the Drummoyne Residents Traffic Committee, Simon and I welcome the opportunity to represent the voice of the Drummoyne community. Our Residents Traffic Committee was formed post the community town hall that was held in a pub on the 24th of March. That was following statements that were made by residents as suggestions and noted by the representatives of Transport for New South Wales that attended, and it was to hold them accountable to the commitment to come back to the community with feedback on those suggestions. Since our formation of our traffic committee, we've advocated for the community and had good engagement with both council, committee members and the Transport for New South Wales. So Simon will go into a little bit about what we've done so far.
Yeah, sure. Just to add to that, I think in terms of what we've done with the committee, we've had good response from everybody that we've worked with. I think we've put forward a number of recommendations, both formally and informally. And I think following on from the previous witness, Transport have now come to the table. So we had a meeting with them, with council and with us 3 weeks ago. And I know following some communication I had with the Roads Minister that they are now funding the traffic review. And that's underway now. They gave us a commitment that they will come back by the end of June with a report. However, just a couple of additional comments to that, and I think echoing some points that have been made, that there remains a high degree of cynicism as to what that report is going to produce. And I think from two perspectives, and I think part of the feedback that we'd like to provide to this committee is that through this whole process, and hopefully we can attempt to change that, the Drummoyne community has been done too. So I think the committee has heard a lot of evidence about what the ramifications and consequences and lived experience of the residents is. But that's all been done really without our knowledge, without consultation, without communication. So you wake up one day and something's changed. One of the things that we strongly advocated for, and also in meeting with Transport 3 or 4 weeks ago, was the study's going to produce a very two-dimensional set of data. What we've asked for is that through their study process, Transport actually engage with residents to get the local colour, to get the lived experience, and add to what otherwise might be a spreadsheet of averages. And as we know, averages kill the truth. So, on any one given day, it might be clear, but the next day be awful. So our plea, in addition to the specific changes that we've already identified, and we may go through some of them today, that Transport continue to engage in a transparent but more importantly consultative way to engage with the residents of Drummoyne.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I start with just asking what your key recommendations are to the government? You said you pulled together some recommendations from the committee. I assume you're going through them in these meetings with Transport for New South Wales. So maybe if we can start with the recommendations that you're making, if you can do that.
Sure, I can pick up a couple, and I know that there's some more here. There's a whole list, frankly, and I think we've supplied those in a previous document. But two major ones I can probably pick out. One is the new bus lane on Gladesville Bridge. We believe that's the major cause of the rat running through East Drummoyne, and the reason for that is it's just not policed. So if you know the area, traffic that is stuck in 3 lanes across Gladesville Bridge now uses the inside lane to bypass that traffic, but in doing so is forced to turn left into Lyons Road. And you kind of go, well, you know, why would you do that? Well, the reason is you can get across Gladesville Bridge quicker, and it's just not policed. You know, I'm guilty of having done it myself. There's no traffic camera, there's no policeman standing on the corner. So there's no point in having a bus lane that is meant to be clear for buses if there's nobody policing it. Further, and we told Transport this, there are 3 different signs for that bus lane, all giving different information. One says it's 6 till 7 daily, one says it's 24 hour, and one says it's only in the afternoons. So that's one example. The other example is, and I know it's been spoken of, is the very silly bus lane in the second lane across the other side of Iron Cove Bridge. We've heard lots of debate about that. In fact, we debated it with Transport 3 or 4 weeks ago. Their response is it's a well-considered, thought-out safety process to have a bus travelling in the second lane. But then immediately told us that they've told the bus drivers that they don't have to use the bus lane, they can use the left lane because they're constantly going in and out. That being the case, then why have the bus lane in the second lane if you've told the bus lane drivers not to bother using it? So it makes no sense because you end up with only a single lane going across the other side of Iron Cove Bridge. And there's others around kind of individual parking areas, and I think the other major one that we reference constantly, and perhaps Claudia can give an example from this morning, just the changed phasing of the traffic lights. That is, Transport told us that they are doing nothing to hold traffic back, whereas all evidence suggests that they are. And I think an example from this morning shows that.
So I regularly travel to Gladesville in the mornings for training and then head back around 7 or 8 in the morning. And this morning is a prime example of what happens. Traffic was banked up in the bus lane to turn left into Lyons Road back to Seymour Street. It's around 250 metres. Being a resident who lives just on the other side of that, I turned left into Seymour Street because there's no point in me sitting there. But what I also observed and videoed was the westbound traffic from that intersection being given a green light while the citybound traffic is held at a red traffic light when we're being told that nothing has been changed with the timing of traffic signalling. And it was a good 30 seconds of video that I have that shows exactly the opposite. And anytime you screenshot what is happening with the traffic on Google Maps, it clearly shows that traffic can be at a standstill all the way back to the Gladesville Bridge, right up until the last set of traffic lights just before the Iron Cove Bridge. And the Iron Cove Bridge itself will be free and clear. And by free and clear, I mean there is next to zero traffic on the Iron Cove Bridge while traffic is backed up for the whole stretch of Drummoyne right back to the Gladesville Bridge.
Can I just ask for clarification around the traffic light changes that you videoed? Explain to the committee what the rationale would be then with that 30-second difference?
It's simply holding traffic back and keeping the balance of traffic clear from the Iron Cove Bridge forward. So the stretch of Victoria Road that is north of the Iron Cove Bridge has very little traffic, but is congested for the whole stretch of Drummoyne all the way back to the Gladesville Bridge.
Thank you. And Mr. Coleman, did you have I think you've suggested you might have also other recommendations as well from the committee.
One thing I've learnt about this is that we have to rely on Transport New South Wales because a lot of this is data analytics. It's way beyond the scope of most councils to even comprehend and understand, especially in this inner city area where you're dealing with such dispersed traffic patterns. Even looking at it, we've got a 4-page document from Drummoyne Council. We've got 36 pages from the Inner West Council, and really most people are out of their depth. We delegate to Transport New South Wales to put these things through. There's a talent bank deficiency in Transport New South Wales in both dealing with people like Transurban and dealing with sort of complex matters where there's going to be ricochet effects all the way through. Just addressing the key problems I've noticed. I've been in Des Moines since 1977 for 30 years in total, right? But had gaps in between the St George's Crescent. And running through it quite simply, Anzac Bridge is the choke point that has to be addressed before we clean up everything else. Number two is how do we treat Victoria Road? Is it going to remain an artery or not? If it remains an artery, it should remain virtually 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m, which ran perfectly well in the 2000 Olympics when we had essentially a 24-hour clearway there. It's never going to go back to having green trees around there. It's too valuable an artery to do so. None of the traffic dispersion was correctly modelled. I've got relatives and my family living in the south side of West Connect, around Annandale, around Forest Lodge and Glebe, working in RPA and going to university, my son did there. None of the traffic dispersion could accurately have been modelled because of West Connect until after the event. And the rapidity of the Transport New South Wales response to what it knew or should have known was going to be a bit of a mess did happen. And then probably the last thing relates to the way Transurban gets a benefit, relatively speaking, compared with the free road system that we're trying to maintain and keep off the state government budget. We've got 4 pedestrian crossings in Victoria Road in Des Moines. 2 of them are one-sided only, 2 of them are two-side. And because of the nature of how people walk across pedestrian crossings with their mobile very ambling slowly, we should make all 4 crossings north or south side only. At least we can turn left or right into Victoria Road heading south or north. That was to happen. And the other thing, we're getting back to what we discussed, lane cameras. Look, in 1977 when Birkenhead Point was, police be standing on the other side of Terry Street, Balmain, catching people crossing Iron Cove Bridge. We don't have the police anymore. The lane cameras are essentially still, I think they're still cameras. They should be movie cameras. If somebody doesn't turn left, book them. But probably the most important thing for where we all live on the east side has been hemispherically cut off. There's only 3 main north-south streets, as Simon did in his diagrams. We need to stop people using it. We need to have no left turns at all at Seymour, Lyons Road and probably Edwin Street to stop all rat running in our centre of our living space. It's pretty tight already. There are no real public transport solutions to this. The bus services are excellent already. It's just a question of getting them moving. Ferries do simply not have the catchment. They're normally pointed at a point at the end with a few houses able to walk safely to it, or let's say inconvenience. So really clearing Victorian Road and making it work rapidly is probably necessary, right through, all the way through to Anzac Bridge, and something has to be done about making Anzac Bridge 5-3 instead of 4-4, like we do with the Harbour Bridge, like we do in Des Moines ourselves when we convert Victoria Road from 3-3 to 4-2 lanes. I think, a few of those things are very simple. Transport New South Wales should jump into action. If they don't have people who can jump into action, we've got to replace those people or have state governments put in the data analytics capability across all state governments if that level of depth is required to do these things properly and make sure they're instituted properly. That's it for me on this bit.
Thank you. Last question for me before I throw to others. What has the response been from Transport for New South Wales? You said you met with them, was it a few weeks ago, to these recommendations. Are they looking at picking up and adopting any of the recommendations?
Not yet, would I think be a fair answer. On the positive side, they met with us and council. It did take a bit of effort to get them there, but they met with us. The major question from them was, have you seen any improvement? And we're going to do a study. So in terms of the recommendations, you know, I don't think any of us are qualified to comment as to whether they're good or bad recommendations, but they seem pretty obvious to most. I think those are going to be thrown into the mix. Those that we did discuss, and again I use the example of putting a traffic camera on the bus lane, seems to take more effort than I would believe it should.
Can we ask who you met with, if you either provided on notice, or if you could tell us now in terms of the transport officials, I'm assuming?
Sure. I'll provide it on notice because I can't remember.
Thank you. I'll go to questions by the opposition, Ms Ward.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for taking the time to come along today. I know this is voluntary and you're obviously concerned enough to spend time forming this committee and putting forward solutions. So thank you for your submission to this committee and also your work with the community. You've put forward some very practical recommendations, and I accept what you say that you're not traffic experts, but equally you are residents.
Sure.
You are people that observe every day, as you've indicated what the problems seem to be, and put forward what seem to be some very sensible recommendations. Have those recommendations been each of those been responded to by Transport? Have they said, we'll get back to you on that, or we just can't do that for these reasons? Has there been a sort of response to each of those?
Not individually to the recommendations. What they committed to at the meeting that we held with them that 3 or 4 weeks ago with Canada Bay Council was that once the traffic study was completed, they would be coming back to the table with us, whether that be with Council directly and then to us as the Resident Traffic Committee, or as a three-way again. But the individual recommendations that we've provided have not been responded to.
Did they provide any response, or is any opportunity to have those formally considered? The traffic study is one thing, obviously you'd welcome that and that's great, but that may or may not deal with these specific recommendations. That's right, isn't it?
Correct.
I mean, they seem very practical. Signage, bus lane, either you can do it and go ahead and do it, or you can't, let us know why. But it doesn't seem like a traffic study is going to actually deal with those direct recommendations.
As an example, one of the recommendations that we provided in terms of moving the bus lane back to the left lane, it seemed from the feedback that Transport for New South Wales represented in that meeting was that they weren't intending to move it back.
Did they say why?
Different reasons given, that the thinking was that it would allow, keeping the left lane as a left lane only, would allow left turning traffic to access Balmain, but beyond Terry Street and Darling Street intersections, it's virtually an empty lane, because not many people use it post those two intersections. The second reason given was in terms of pedestrian safety for traffic turning left. I can't see how that adds to pedestrian safety, keeping the bus lane in the middle. If anything, we consider that to be more risky. Having been a witness as a resident to a Wolseley Street intersection entrance where traffic enters Victoria Road on Wolseley Street at my end of Drummoyne, a bus basically crushed a car into the bus stop because it didn't see a car turning, and that I see as the real risk in keeping the bus lane in the middle along Victoria Road, because it's only a matter of time before that happens again.
Yeah. Did you have anything to add to those?
Look, all I can just say is it's an expertise issue between us, the public, and what the data analytics are required and the way you measure it. It is really a difficult field. We're way out of our depth compared with the data that they've got available. We rely on their good talent to be able to do this. I think what the committee needs to do is examine what talent's sitting inside there and see if it's up to scratch in world-class responses and planning on these sort of issues. That's all I'd like to say on that.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add?
Probably the only point, I think in the original list we put together, there were probably 20 odd recommendations, and I think in our initial correspondence to Transport, we said, any one of these probably, you can tick off as saying not meaningful or not relevant. But, when looked at collectively, they are meaningful. And I think, part of the challenge is you can look at anyone and say, no, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that, and justify them individually. And I think to all of the comments, we're not traffic experts, but there's a list of things that we think are worthy of consideration. And if the answer is no, well then fine, give us a different option then. And they're also very small things. And I think in reflecting on some of the other evidence and going back to the data study, I think it was probably 2 weeks ago now, there was a crash in the M8 and it completely clogged up the system. In some parts of East Drummoyne, you only need an extra 6 cars, not 60, but 6 cars at one junction, and the place gets gridlocked. And there's an example where the removal of 2 car park spaces would actually solve part of that problem. And it kind of goes back to the point we've made about the data study. When we hear data around Victoria Road of 80,000, car movements a day, when you've got an issue of 2 cars, it doesn't even make the decimal point.
Right.
And that's why we kind of, it's easy to dismiss any one of those, but when looked at as a total package, we are, we're looking at kind of major improvement from a series of small things. I think it is a complex issue, and it's probably a series of small things that are going to help fix it.
And you don't have to be an expert to observe, as a local resident, what you can see every day and what perhaps might alleviate that.
And some of, I don't want to go through the list, but some of them you kind of look at them and, there's not a pub in Australia in which they would pass the test.
You've, in your submission, Mr. Gatward helpfully suggested that a formal structure be established to engage with the community in responding to these points and ongoing. Is that something that Transport has indicated they'd be supportive of?
No.
Have you had any response to that, or is it we'll get back to you after the traffic study in June?
It would be fair to say I think we've confused them. The hierarchy is Transport deals with council, and residents get involved, as and when we choose that they shall be. So in the three-way meeting we had with them 3 weeks ago, I think there is now some confusion as to whether Transport should deal with council, Transport should deal with us, council should deal with us, who's dealing with who. And I think that's probably a fair question to ask. I think our point is, and probably the reason we existed in the first place is, residents didn't see council stepping up. Now, that may or may not be a fair accusation, but they weren't. My observation is that there is a huge power imbalance between Transport and council, both in terms of understanding, in terms of, myriad things. And I've always advocated that we shouldn't exist if council were doing their job. Now, that's not a criticism of council, other than it's just a reality. So somewhere in this mix, whether it be Transport directly or whether it be through council, what I don't want to see happen is that the voice of the residents disappears.
Yeah.
And that's a voice with faces, not a voice through a website or not a voice through a survey. It's real people with the real lived experience.
And in fact, it may not be something to be afraid of. It might be something that's very welcome and might be very constructive and might actually help resolution of the issue.
Our view is, we're not experts, but we're not dumb.
Yeah, thank you. And just to finish on that then, so if this committee were to consider making a recommendation that a formal structure be put in place between the Residents Committee, Council and Transport for New South Wales with a point person that could really progress this and say, right, we've got a timeline, we've got a June traffic study, we'd like to look at these specific options and go through them. This potentially is something that could be very constructive and get the thing dealt with. Might not be perfect, but it's a very good step and better than what's may or may not be in place. Is that something you'd agree with?
Absolutely.
And support?
They should be on the ground pretty well as soon as the thing opened.
Well, they've got you.
They should have been on the ground at East Des Moines. They should have been on the ground in Roselle. They should have had 10 to 20 people out there looking at stuff, and actually talking to people or the drivers in the lanes waiting to get into Victoria Road. And that's what should have been done. Look, I just want to repeat back the most important thing. They took 8 to 9 lanes of traffic into a 4-lane Anzac Bridge AM. It's reverse on the PM. The other side of Anzac Bridge splits into 7 roads just after the Harris Street turn off. There is a concrete barrier this tall on Anzac Bridge. There's obviously got to be an extra lane put in on the left-hand side, all the way to the Harris Street first exit. But 8 to 9 into 4, and then an exit, 3 into Bathurst Street, 2 into Cross City Tunnel, 2 to Harbour Bridge. So you can add it up. That's the thing that could be most easily solved. There'll be a construction component, probably, maybe 10 or 20 million bucks compared with the billions we did spend. The other thing is, and this is more important, is that the imbalance between Transurban, which is a perpetual organisation, compared with politicians that are here for a term or two, the talent difference, the preference to Transurban to keep no traffic backed up inside the tunnel, but bank us up in Des Moines, is what half the problem. This 30-second delay to make in the tunnel.
Thank you. We'll go to questions from government members now. Mr. Mark Buddige.
Thank you. I just want to tease out some of this interesting thing which has come out, this kind of disconnect between council and yourselves, because we heard on evidence earlier today there seemed to be some ambiguity or doubt about this traffic study, which we've now just heard on evidence from you that it's actually underway.
Yep.
Not only has it been funded, it's underway,
Yep.
as opposed to the vagueness of the evidence before, which was not sure. So councillors haven't been liaising with you as a group at all on what's going on? You're not talking to each other?
We met with the mayor and the general manager of Canada Bay Council.
Yeah.
And I can't speak for other councillors, but we're working directly with the mayor and the general manager, and that's the current status.
Because I found it a bit strange that the previous councillor who gave evidence didn't know about the traffic study. So there's obviously the communication's a bit breaking down.
Yeah. Ask council, don't know.
Yeah, okay. So this, basically, from what I've heard from your evidence, is we've got this traffic study. It will be, as you, I think, Mr. Coleman, have stated on a number of occasions, the data will be quite sophisticated and high level, but there needs to be some practical bent on it, if you like, so meshing the two together. So you would be happy, I'm presuming, if your input was given into maybe has there been any dialogue on the parameters of the study and how it would work? What are the inputs at a high level, just so you get some comfort around it, or is it just let us go off and do the study? At one level you can understand Transport for New South Wales saying this, right? There has to be an objective, data-driven analysis on what the problem is before you can come up with a solution. So they can't really recommend recommendations until they've got the data. But has there been any dialogue on the parameters of that study and how it would work?
No. What Transport for New South Wales presented to us were the data collection points in and around Des Moines, including the local roads that are impacted by rat running. That was the extent of information that we were provided in the meeting that was held with them and council a few weeks ago.
Okay.
And the commitment to have that study completed by the end of June.
End of June, okay. So it would help if you had some input into that process.
What we represented...
For example... Oh, go on. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to add that what we represented to Council and Transport for New South Wales at that meeting was the imperative to include the lived experience and not to simply rely on two-dimensional data to make decisions and recommendations.
So what this two-dimensional data phrase has been used a couple of times. Can we just articulate on what we mean by that?
It's time and volume that they're measuring, time, speed.
Yeah.
It doesn't include the real experience. You're talking about averages. It might be an average of 20 minutes across a 24-hour period.
Yeah.
But if you look at the peak periods, which is not limited to Monday to Friday AM peak, increasingly it's evening and weekends as well now.
So these experiential nuances won't be picked up by...
No.
Yeah, okay.
Correct.
I understand the concern, yeah. Okay, so... And also just this reconciliation between councillors, your elected representatives, Transport for New South Wales, and you as the voice of the residents, if you like. So you say you're meeting with the are there regular meetings to update you on the dialogue, or is it what's happening with that? Are there more meetings to come, or is it you're waiting for the traffic study and then sometime in the future, the council and you may coalesce around? I mean, I don't understand the process.
I'll just make it quite clear.
Yeah.
There should have been a letterbox poll.
There should have been, eh?
Letterbox poll.
Yep.
I mean, in politics and business, they don't walk the dirt. My business is we always used to walk the dirt. Where are all these people working for Transport New South Wales walking around at 7 to 9 a.m. in the morning making their observation? They're relying on our observations. How do we make our observations appear rightly directly in front of them? They should be polling. They should be doing this progressively every 4 weeks, just like you do before a major, election campaign, right? You do the polling. You keep collecting all the information you can to get all the recommendations together, filter them, and they should be doing this. As I say, I don't have the time to go into data analytics. I don't know who has in our local suburbs got that skill base. My brother was a town planner for the Victorian State Government. It's very complex stuff just to work out where to build a high school.
So to answer your question, it is unclear as to what's going to happen next. And I think the answer is we have to wait for the traffic study. It's clear and evident that nothing's going to happen until that study's been done. So, in terms of regular meetings with the council or transport, no, there isn't. And it's been, an awful lot of lobbying on our part to have got that meeting to happen.
To get in the door, yeah.
And that's okay. That's what we existed for, right? So, in terms of formalising the next steps and any structure thereafter, there is no agreed format. And I guess, we're in a bit of an abeyance until that study's been done. And I think in answer to one of the questions earlier, we're not confused. We're an advocacy group, and we'll continue to advocate and be annoying to get stuff happening. I think it's unclear, Transport aren't clear who they should deal with.
Okay, that's good evidence. Chair, when's our reporting date?
The July. Yeah, 15th of July.
So I guess one of the problems is we missed the boat with the traffic study, because ideally what you want is a forum, tripartite forum with council, you and Transport for New South Wales to have some sort of nuanced input into the traffic study prior to June would be ideal.
Well, I think there's two steps. One is the lived experience piece.
2 days.
One is the lived experience piece, which adds colour.
Sorry, was it end of June that they were going to do it, or
end of June they said they would report back.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me be clear. End of June is when the study will be complete.
So in an ideal world, in the next month, it'd be good if you and council as a collective had input into the stuff. Yeah, okay.
At the broader community,
Yeah.
Not just 4 people.
Yeah, okay.
Can I say something just picking up that point?
Sure,
Just quickly?
Ms Ward, yes.
Yep, just quickly, just picking up that constructive point. I think you've agreed that would be useful, but would it also be useful, I think in your submission you talked about having ongoing engagement in a formal sense, a formalised group that says, yes, we'll have that input in June, we'll get the report back, and then we'd like to keep working with you constructively.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask around just the whether the congestion, the impacts, like from day one when the Roselle Interchange opened, and then there was a change that, in terms of pushing some of the impacts back further to Drummoyne, what the situation is like now, say over the past few weeks. Is it just as bad? Are people changing their behaviour a bit? What is it still as frustrating as it was in terms of being stuck in those local roads? What's it like now?
I think the shortest answer is you never know what you're going to get. It's quite random. There is the general AM peak. There is very often now also evening peak and on the weekends. You never know how long it's going to take you to get out of the suburb. And then once you're out, you don't know what it's going to be like when you get back, to get back in.
Could I just add to that? The committee should understand that there's also a Saturday and Sunday problem.
Yeah.
We are jam-packed on some days. Sporting around about 12 noon is a disaster. And I also like to bring Birkenhead Point into this. I mean, nobody in their right mind would allow a shopping centre to be built with only one access road to it. Now, on public holidays and most weekends, either Transport New South Wales or the local council has got to do something about getting rid of the traffic congestion there. And particularly Saturdays and Sundays can only be solved by 7 days, 7-hour clearway in that Victoria Road, because it's a disaster there. Most shopkeepers have made parking already available in their backsides. Very few commercial premises will be damaged by going 7 to 7 p.m, 7 days a week.
I just wanted to ask about the public transport options. Mr. Coleman, you said that you didn't think there was too much there in terms of solutions because buses seem to run well and probably not much to do with ferries. I just wanted to get others' views on that. Ms. Campbell, what do you think in terms of public transport improvements that could be made?
Ferry services in terms of numbers have improved, but the number of people seeking to get the ferry are often left stranded. I catch it from Drummoyne. I wasn't aware that ferries have capacity limits, and so they very often aren't able to stop to pick up any more passengers. So even now that ferry services have increased in number, you still often have this circumstance where they're simply too full. And so one of the feedback points that we have seen come from the community is to implement services that start further down Parramatta River, so that once you get to suburbs along Canada Bay, there's still capacity to be able to accept more passengers. On buses, so buses is the other option. That's the other way I travel generally into town. What you find is that since buses have been privatised and since COVID, the number of bus services have reduced and have not returned to pre-COVID service levels. In addition, they are frequently cancelled or simply run late. The feedback at the meeting from Transport for New South Wales on bus services is that they measure on-time running separately to cancellations, and I suggested that really should be a combined metric, because as a bus passenger, I'm not measuring on-time running separately to cancellations. I need to get where I need to go.
Thank you, that's very useful. Just with the ferries, I'll come to you in a second, Mr. Gatwood. Just with the ferries, was the situation of there being too many passengers and the ferries full to capacity, did that increase markedly once the interchange opened, or was that a situation that was building? How much did you notice post?
I can't comment too much on that, only that my observation is that there are still the instances, particularly around weekends, which tends to be busier for ferry traffic, but I think the ferry schedule is actually reduced at the weekends, that you find yourself stranded at the wharf.
Mr. Gatwood, you had something?
Yeah, the only point I was going to make was, there's a very large focus on getting into the city and out again, which is, probably right, and that's demonstrated by, Transport have told us 100 times, it's only 2 minutes longer now to get from the base of Gladesville Bridge to Anzac Bridge. A lot of our residents aren't going to the city; they're trying to move across the suburb, and there is no bus that takes you 2 k's. But that 2k journey to drop the kids at school, take an elderly patient to the doctor, get to the shops, has now gone from a 5-minute journey to a 20-minute journey, and that's just that's where the major pain points are. So I guess a lot of our recommendations and certainly community feedback is not just about how long it takes to get to the city and out again. It's how quickly I can get my kids to school. And maybe if I can just add to that is then the safety issue of getting my they're not my kids, I don't have any, but, you know, getting the kids to school. You know, rat running is a, you know, it's not an everyday occurrence, but when it happens, and I think a point we've made in our submission is people who are rat running are not reasonable and rational drivers. They are already frustrated because they've been in traffic for a long period of time. They're using our local streets, which are not built for large volumes of traffic, and, you know, not overly welcoming or not overly well engaged with the road rules. So, you know, people walking their kids to school to try and get across Victoria Road are now dealing with frustrated commuters trying to get to their meeting or tradies trying to get to a job. So it's not just the volume of traffic, it's also now the speed of the traffic and the safety that's impacting on pedestrians who are now, you know, if you will, forced to walk, and probably, you know, to the health benefit, but, you know, it's now unsafe in many of the junctions for them to do that.
Thank you. Are there further questions from members? No. Thank you so much for appearing before the committee today and for your work for your community, for this committee. I'm sure you've spent many hours looking into this project now, so we really appreciate it. That's the end of today's hearing. The committee will be in touch with you if you did agree to take any questions on notice. And just be mindful that you will need to respond 7 days after you receive the transcript as opposed to 21 days because of the committee's tight time frame.
Sure.
We'd like to thank you very much for
Thank you.
actually
It was very
listening.
helpful.
Thank you very
Okay,
much for
thank
your
you.
time and your efforts.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and that's the end of today's hearing.